Traveling to consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
And we're live. So, Dr. Brianna Diorio, thanks for being here. Excited to chat with you.
Thank you for having me. I am also excited.
Well, I'm excited. I'm not sure why you're excited, but I'm excited because you're a doctor of integrative medicine. So can you walk me through like what that schooling kind of looks like? Because, from my mindset, like doctor is usually it feels like more of a structured type thing, but then integrative medicine is almost like this. To me, it feels like a more of a fluid or dynamic approach to medicine. So like, what did that schooling look like, and kind of what do you do?
Sure. So it was a really natural kind of progression. I mean, I started out in my career. I originally went to school, I thought to be a Spanish teacher, and then I kind of changed my trajectory. I was like a personal trainer at the time, and I really just loved the science of nutrition and all of that. So I had decided to get my master's in nutrition at University of Bridgeport. So I became a clinical nutritionist there. And then from there, I kind of just continued on with schooling, I think, as anybody does as a lifelong learner. I got my holistic lifestyle certification from the C.H.E.K Institute, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with. Um, I also became a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. So that was what allowed me to really do a lot of cool functional lab tests and kind of dig a little bit deeper and, test, don't guess. And that was great. And then kind of through there, I became an herbalist, which was amazing because I was always just really drawn to naturopathic and alternative kind of, therapies and modalities. And then after that, it was kind of like, okay, where else can I go from here? I was really interested in mental health stuff. I was really interested in kind of marrying the worlds of Western and Eastern philosophies. I studied a lot of Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine in my schooling throughout the year. And so I came across this PhD program for integrative medicine, which I love because I think in the world we live in now, there's so much competition between it has to be East or it has to be Western, or, some people fall into that bucket of like, okay, yeah, I'm super holistic and I'm really natural and I'm not exposed to XYZ. And then they think they're a bad person if they need to take a Tylenol because they have a headache. And I just don't agree with that. I'm a really big proponent of put as many tools in your health toolbox as you can, and integrating or meshing together or blending together as many healing modalities as you can. There's always a time and a place for that, and we can all play nicely together is what I say. And I kind of always joke and say that I hate group projects. I was kind of always that person who was like, I'll just do it myself. But healing is a group project. It is a team effort. And so with integrative medicine, it's really about integrating what works best for not only yourself, but also if you are a practitioner, the person that you're working with, meeting them where they are, not just what you think is best because of just straight pure research, but sometimes empirical research is important. Sometimes using different healing modalities, seeing where they are in their wellness journey. Science can only go so far sometimes, and then integrating in things like acupuncture and cupping, and maybe for them it is herbalism, maybe for them they are still taking maybe something like a medication, but then they want a more natural approach. So it's kind of just the idea of playing together with all the different healing modalities that exist so you can kind of live your best life, whatever that means to you.
So first of all, you went over a lot of things there, so I'm excited to break those down. The first thing that's coming to mind is you were talking about integrating the differences of like Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy, which to me, I've always kind of viewed it, especially in this world of spirituality versus science, where Western philosophy tends to be more science, concrete based, whereas Eastern is more flow, spirit, energetic. So in this meshing, especially in the worlds of medicine, do you find that analogy kind of holds up, where the Western medicine is more structured, it's more pill based, it's more let's just cut and find out, versus the Eastern's a little bit more flowy, or is that just my perception of it?
No, I think that's spot on. Obviously, I think from a very 30,000-foot view, that's probably the easiest way to bucket it. But I think what's important as well is to note that it can be really overwhelming for people. So sometimes if they just don't feel well, it does help short term to be like, okay, this is potentially why you have XYZ issues going on. And unfortunately, in Western medicine, they label it as a quote diagnosis, which I don't love because it's more so generally a range of symptoms or imbalances in the body and not necessarily like you have this problem with you, so it's never fixable. Where, yes, I think, Chinese medicine, Eastern philosophies, all of that does take into account, okay, well, what's going on, on a deeper level? Let's get team root cause, right? Like everything can affect anything in the body, is kind of what I always say. And especially with Chinese medicine, there is such an emphasis on the emotional side of things because, every organ has a paired emotion, and then there's, a sub organ, and then, there's colors, elements. So I think that sometimes people aren't always just ready for that though on day one. So science maybe, or Western medicine maybe, or more A to B, conversations can at least for some people help them feel like for the first time in a very long time that they're finally being heard or seen or understood, or they just have that light bulb moment where they're like, oh my God, yeah, that makes sense. And then you can go a little bit deeper. Sometimes you meet people who they've already done all of that work and they're like, yeah, I feel like I get it. I understand mechanism of action in the body. I understand the physiological pathways. Now I want to really kind of like level up, or what I call putting in the granite countertop of your health house, right? Like have the solid foundation, do all that boring stuff first, and then get a gold toilet if you want. But you have to do the basic boring stuff first.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and especially in my journey with diet and nutrition, where I've kind of bounced between, like, I read the book Intuitive Eating, and they kind of labeled me as professional dieter of trying every single diet under the sun. And now I'm kind of in that more framework of like, well, what feels right? What kind of feels nourishing in this moment? And I do believe, to your point, like you can't, it feels as though you almost can't go from just eating McDonald's every day and candy to just, okay, what feels good? Because your baseline is sugar and candy and processed foods and, an unbalanced diet. So that's almost what your intuition is going to take you towards.
Totally. But sometimes people have a hard time with their intuition, depending on, as I'm sure most of your listeners know, all goes back to childhood stuff, little T trauma, big T trauma, call it whatever you want. But there's usually something subconsciously going on, or, underneath the waves that is causing us to have these external whatever needs or validations that we want. And so for some people, they don't even know how to trust themselves, or they don't know what their homeostasis, quote, North Star is. And so for you, let's say, like maybe you have a better North Star ability because you've tried a lot of things and maybe you've been a bit of a diet agnostic in some sense, where it's like, yeah, you try a bunch of stuff on and you see what fits best. And so I do even think that there is a time and a place almost for people to go like balls to the walls and be super extreme if you need to in whatever modality that is. Like with dieting, for example, I've seen this a lot in my practice. I did this when I used to do like bodybuilding competitions and things. You go all the way to the edge so you know what your 100% is, and you know that obviously we don't want to be at zero, but all of our health is generally on kind of this pendulum, if you will. So in order for you to figure out what your 50%, 70, 80, 90 is, you have to almost be like, yeah, let me try all the things and try it at the most extreme and then see what actually works for me and what my evolving definition of what feels like intuitive or best for me is in alignment. But that I don't think comes as easily to people as it sounds on paper sometimes. And it sounds really nice and like hippy dippy. And yeah, like that's great. And like be in the flow. And people are like, what does that mean? What's my first step though? Like, what's the next logical step for me? So sometimes it's also like, yeah, this theory is great, but how do we actually start to break it down and then integrate it and implement it into our lives that can be sustainable and maintainable and enjoyable?
And I think right there's the key of it, right? Which is the enjoyable piece. And that's something, I've started noticing in my life, which is, okay, if I don't have the wealth or the, whether it's kind of blanking on things here, whatever it's like being with a girl, living where I want to live, wealth, it kind of comes down to just that enjoying the process and enjoying that flow. And that seems to be like the crux of any sort of quote unquote manifestation that people might be putting out there or wanting to get. It's that you aren't surrendering to kind of that current process of where you are. And even more so, I kind of got this weird vision whenever you were talking about the North Star. And even in my journey, it's almost like you know where your North Star is, but 5 years ago, I would have said, it's somewhere between like 120 and 90 degrees in the sky. And
Totally.
like now it's probably like, oh, it's somewhere between like 101 and 102 degrees. And it feels like it's almost this minute now changing. It's like this pendulum was swinging back and forth between 90 degrees and 120, and now it's just swinging between 101 and 100. And every single time I try something, it's almost just like narrowing it down, and it feels as if that also connects to your granite countertop. Is that like once you're just doing those minute little changes, that's whenever you're kind of putting in that gold toilet.
I love that you said that because I have been thinking about this so much recently because I think there's been such this rise of, self-help and higher consciousness and awareness, and that's great. But also I think sometimes people go too far down that, and then it's almost like taking a break from healing. Like, when can we take a step back or integrate, right? So I think a lot of the goal for people, whether they realize it or not, or eventually when they have that awakening or they finally get it, most of that healing that we're going on is to, number one, get back to our most authentic version of ourselves. I think that's truly the goal for a lot of people. To your point, though, it's like that changes over time and that oscillates, I think, depending on maybe what you're focused on. But a lot of it is also unlearning things that just don't serve us, or we tried on for a little bit. And it's kind of like, fashion, how it changes, where you're like, yeah, this was really cool when I was in sixth grade and I used to wear white eyeliner and that was amazing. And then, things come back kind of in full circle and it becomes back in fashion again. So much of it is really just, I think, being able to be a bit more graceful with yourself, of flowing, of like, yeah, trying this on, this fits for a bit, doesn't fit anymore. And people really struggle to hold on to things that don't fit them anymore, or they're trying all these different things to ultimately just get back to their most authentic self, whatever that means to each individual.
This episode of Traveling to Consciousness is brought to you by the official Traveling to Consciousness app, available on the iOS and Google Play Store. On this app, you're going to get exclusive content, from articles to meditations to anything else that Clayton is going to put out. Here's also where you're going to find the only place to find the ad-free versions of the podcast. You're also going to be able to get the podcast at earlier dates than normal, the free release version of it. So the Traveling to Consciousness podcast app, I highly suggest that you download it, because it's the only way that I suggest that you listen to it. And what's even better is that the company is always making updates, so please let me know if you personally have a recommendation and we can get that in there. So remember, download the Traveling to Consciousness app so that you can get early releases, you can get the video format, you can get it ad-free, and so much more. And I think there's a beautiful corollary here with, and this was actually a question that I was thinking about before our conversation. I think there's a beautiful corollary here with fad diets, for example. Like, whether it was probably, I don't know, 20 years ago, it was like, low carb or high carb, low fat. And then it became, no, you need high fat, low carb. And it's like, no, now you need to do paleo. It's like, no, now keto is the thing. And then, no, it's carnivore. No, it's veganism. And so if we take this step back from this and kind of look at it from a, let's say, generic human consciousness perspective, is it almost our collective consciousness coming across these different ways of diet and exercise, and then we all are kind of trying on these different hats? And then I guess also kind of in this question as well is, it comes back to that resistance or dropping the things that aren't working for you. How do you find, how do you balance releasing a diet that is no longer serving you in hopes that you can find something that serves you a little bit better?
So anybody who's ever been my client or has followed me knows that I'm a very big proponent of being a nutrition agnostic. Like, I don't prescribe to believe in any one thing forever, because if it was that simple, then we wouldn't have the obesity epidemic that we do. We wouldn't have all the diseases of lifestyle that we do, right? Like, and the problem is, especially now with social media and everyone being an expert and a guru, is everyone thinks that they're going to just all of a sudden reinvent the wheel or find this new biohack or amazing nutrient. And don't get me wrong, there's really cool research in like specific plant constituents and how they work on enzymes and longevity genes, and all that stuff is really cool. But the basic boring stuff, you are never going to be able to biohack your way out of that, or, find something that is not going to poke a hole in it eventually. So like I always tell people, try on all the things, because what worked for you a year ago might not work for you now, and what worked for you even a week ago might not work for you now. And I'm also a really big believer in the cyclical nature of things and doing things seasonally, right? Like, so if we look to nature, as most of us I think should and do, ideally, I live in New Jersey. Like, I shouldn't really be eating strawberries right now in the middle of the winter. Like, where are they growing? Like, yes, they're coming from California, maybe, and they're organic. But the point is that there's a season for everything and there's a time for everything. So there very well might be a time where, cool, you like keto? Absolutely do it. Do it until it doesn't work anymore, is what I tell people. Or when you start not not just doing something for, a second and practitioner hopping and doing that, because people also need to give time, but truly being honest with yourself and checking in. Number one, how compliant have I actually been, right? So when people say things like, oh, well, XYZ doesn't work for me. And then you have to kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, 70% compliance equals 70% results. 90% compliance equals 90% results, right? So there's always going to be a level of how honest am I being with myself? And then also, what else is going on? Diet is such a small piece of what is going on in people's health. I think for a lot of individuals, it just happens to be the low hanging fruit that they feel they have most control over. And same thing, like, I'll die on this hill. You can't out diet your way out of shitty relationships, pro-inflammatory thoughts, bad people, products that you're washing your face with, what you're cleaning your, house with. So there's so much more that needs to go into that conversation just behind the diet. And I think until you address all those other things too, like, then I'm not sure how much it moves the needle. But basically, like, I just believe try different things in different times of your life. Different lifestyles, different life stages are going to need different nutrients. And then, of course, that's the whole conversation of biochemical individuality. So if one diet worked for everybody for your whole life, you wouldn't have the changes that you do that forces people to read the books and listen to the podcast and everything else, because our body and health is, always dynamic. And people don't love that answer, because that's not, oh, and I so happen to have a product that fixes this problem that you all of a sudden have, right? So like, it's a lot more work, and you can't just go into a supplement store and take XYZ. You have to like really be honest and do that work. And it takes a long time. And people just, they don't love to always have to do that and make that kind of, time and energy investment.
It's not a sexy answer
It's
either.
not a sexy answer. I'm not
No.
known for my sexy answers. I'm known for my brutal honesty, because that's, and kind of cutting through the BS, because, true change happens when you're tired of your own bullshit. I mean, I've been saying that for as long, probably since I've come out the womb. So like, I think a big part of it as well is taking responsibility for what you're still doing or not doing, and then just trying to blame it on your diet. Like poor nutrition, poor nutritional sciences, who just get all the blame, right? And then you have these zealots out here who are trying to make a whole career by bashing other people who eat a certain way. Like, that's not helping anybody ultimately. So I think it's about, like, listening to yourself. And then also, I think also just trying to try new things, like being open to trying new things and letting go of that diet that maybe doesn't serve you anymore.
For sure. And and I guess this kind of spawned from a little bit of a behemoth of a question. And you took the route of explaining it at like the individualistic level, which is super important for sure. I'm curious though, if we walk back to the question, if you've looked at it from like this global perspective of diet, like kind of going back to how there's or what was it? Oh, like low carb is it? Now it's high carb, now it's keto, now it's paleo. Do you think we'll get to a place at like as a human species where we're like, oh, it's just one size fits all. We don't have to go down the carnivore route, or you don't have to be vegan and then hate people who are carnivore. You don't have to be paleo and then hate the keto club. Do you see that as a potential future for us?
No, it's not possible, because there's too many contributing factors. I mean, you're like, you're where you were born, right? Like this is why certain cultures can have more of a discrepancy to eating certain things, or why, you see certain cultures that have certain dietary patterns, right? So like I just don't think, unfortunately, it will ever be that easy. I think what people should do collectively is look for common denominators, right? So like what are the common themes that we see among these big different categories, right? So like I think we could all agree that, yeah, maybe removing processed garbage sugar would be a good thing. Okay, great. Maybe we could all agree that we should eat more fruits and vegetables. Obviously, not if you're a carnivore. That's not going to be for you, right? But I think there's some things we could all agree that we should be drinking more quality water. We can all agree that we should be getting better sleep and cultivating better relationships, right? Like there are some things, and then diet, unfortunately, just there are going to be some individual nuances here and there. But I think it is about trying to find the common denominator among what some of these things have, reducing, pesticides, trying to eat organic, right? Like if you are eating meat, making sure that that's organic as well, not cooking it at really high temperatures. So I think, the short answer is no, or just I personally, I don't think we're going to get there. Would be nice, but I don't think it's going to happen. Do you think it's going to happen?
I don't know. I mean, well, so in your answer, it seemed like you were answering if there's just one diet that's going to be for everybody, more as like I was trying to propose that everybody will figure out that they need to find their own diet. Does that make sense?
But I don't think that that's possible either, because your body changes, right? Like, and your needs change on a
Well,
literally a day-to-day
that's
basis.
kind of my point, right? Like if people could just understand that you're this high frequency multidimensional being that's always changing, therefore your diet should always change. Like do you ever see that idea of piercing the majority of people?
Oh, yeah, that I thought you were posing it the other way. Like, yes, do I think that people will eventually understand that, yes, I do need to figure this out for me and that it's going to be dynamic and fluid? I mean, the optimist in me would say, yes, I hope so. But the reality of seeing people becoming more specialized, quote, in whatever their field is, or they're an expert in XYZ, I think people are trying to create more and more of these niche markets for whatever reason. So, I
Mm.
don't know. Time will tell. Time is always the great, equalizer.
Well, and it's kind of reminding me of truth in a sense, right? Because if if we kind of start to embody our own truths and become more in tune with the frequency of true, whatever that means for you or me, wouldn't that help us to at least weed out kind of the bullshit that we see within certain ideologies or certain, and I don't want to bash everything. It's not like, oh, it's all carnivores, but it's like there's a section of carnivores who hate or they hate the vegans, and then there's a section of vegans that think if you're carnivore, there's a spot saved for you in hell. So is there maybe this process underlying where if we kind of just find our way to truth, we might be able to see through the mirage or the smoke and mirrors that the nutrition industry has put up for us?
It's an interesting question, because this is actually where science can be beneficial, because I think what's happening is that people are making it their truth and making it a religion and making it, I will die on this hill for XYZ. And it's becoming super personalized to people. Like it's becoming very emotionally triggering for a lot of people. And that's why I think people get so flared up about it. But I believe, especially like being in the field of research and academia for as long as I have, like somebody who really values science can say, listen, I have found research on this side and I have found research on this side. And I understand these are your arguments. These are my arguments. And like, it's cool either way, right? Like, I don't understand this idea of where this came, this like internet bullying of, okay, it's cool to bash somebody for whatever they want to do. Like, if it's not harming me, if it's not harming you, I don't think that that's actually ultimately serving the PR campaign of whatever they're trying to push. So, to me, it actually feels like disingenuous and untruthful when people are coming out so like out of the gate being like ripping on other people. I don't understand that. And I think it makes you look ignorant, and I think it makes you look uneducated, because you should really be able to objectively assess. Like if anybody watched I think it was Chris Kresser on the Joe Rogan podcast with, I forget who else he did it, but like, he did a real bang up job of being able to be research literate and say like, cool, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. And I see these articles that you're pulling, and that's great. But this is also my side. And it's like, at the end of the day, if you're doing what makes you happy and you feel good doing it, cool, like do that. I really don't understand why this has become such a thing. And I think it's ultimately just doing a disservice to the health and wellness industry, especially in the field of like, nutrition.
I feel like it's probably maybe a component of it's probably cultivated from either scarcity or a lack of confidence in what they're either pushing, or in that ego of wanting to be right. And I've been validated by all these people who this diet works for, and you've been validated by all these people who the diet works for them, and so you get into maybe this place of always being told that what you're saying is correct, and never wanting to kind of maybe check yourself at the door of, hey, just because this works for the people that it was supposed to work for doesn't mean that it's not going to work for other people who it's not supposed to work for.
Absolutely. Empirical evidence, people ride that till the day they die, and confirmation bias. That's why I always tell people too, like, watching a Netflix documentary doesn't make you a scientist all of a sudden. If their agenda is pushing veganism or carnivore or whatever, like obviously cherry picking data is a very real thing that exists in the scientific world. So you're
What was
going to do that.
the vegan, there was a vegan documentary that like went pretty viral, and I have like a scientific background. What
Yeah.
was it? I kind of don't want to give it the name drop, but
Yeah, I don't remember, because I'm sure it was the same for you. If I had $1 for every person who texted me and was like, "What do you think about this?" and I was like, "What was
yo,
the intention of that documentary?" I was like, "What was the
yes.
intention? What agenda were they pushing?"
Oh, the director has his own pea protein. Oh, okay. He has his own plant-based food he's selling. Oh, right,
Right.
right, right. But
Yeah.
it was interesting because like even the way that they presented all this different information was like complete, just it was like cherry picked. It was like kind of obscured in the way of like manipulation, right? It wasn't even like scientific or anecdotal. Like, there was like one scene where they had these basketball players and they all ate a burrito, and one of them like had meat, the other one was like plant based, and it's like, oh look, like there's more fat in your blood, and then they're like, oh shit, like there's more fat in my blood. And I'm not scientifically based in those regards, so like I don't even know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And then they're presenting it as like, oh my gosh, there's fat in your blood, like, oh da 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 da. Like I could very easily see that going either way of like being good or bad. And then they did that throughout the entire quote unquote documentary, and I'm just like this does nobody, this is a disservice to almost everybody listening.
So well said. And I think that's unfortunately because we live in this clickbait, Instagram, like instant dopamine hit society. Our attention span is shorter than it's ever been, kind of thing, right? Like science is even now being distilled into, this is the article. And then people will post it on Instagram. And I'm like, did you even read the research study though? Like, what kind of study was it? Was it double blind? Was it, a perspective study? How long was it ran? Who funded it? How many participants? Like, what was the demographic? And people need to learn to be research literate too. And that's really important. But again, at the end of the day, and this is why I actually love like Chinese medicine and stuff too, because, sometimes there's not research for certain, like sometimes shit just works, right? Like it's been around for thousands of years and whatever. And sometimes things don't work, whether there's research or not. So that's why it's like, to thy own self be true in
Mm.
research, in science, and in health. And that's really important, because only you know what's best for you. And just because it's good for somebody else doesn't always mean that it's good and healthy for you. But that's where you have to have this level of discernment to say, yeah, if I'm really being honest with myself when I lay my head on my pillow at night, I want to feel like I belong to a group, which I think goes back, of course, to evolutionary benefits, right? Like we're in tribes. We all know this tale as old as time. So I want to fit in this box of being XYZ, paleo, carnivore, whatever. But if you're like, yeah, I've been doing this and I'm still super bloated and I'm really tired and my skin is breaking out, why would you keep doing that? Right. So there is a level of honesty and discernment that does have to come into play eventually.
It's a good point. And this is a question that I've been kind of wrestling with myself. And I know this might come across as being kind of anti-scientific, but like I am very scientific, let's say, especially whenever it comes to like physics and particles and the way quantum physics works. But it's interesting to me because something that they've discovered with quantum physics is the observer effect, and another name for it being the placebo effect. So we live in a world where the placebo effect is very, very real. So at what level are we able to even trust science whenever whoever's running the experiment has an internal bias, whether, and this might get, I want to kind of stay away from getting too far left per se in this conversation, because I feel like this might go that way where it's like, oh, it's just your perception. But it feels to me as though if, like, internally, I am even the most trying to be unbiased scientist ever, runs double blind placebo, puts, so much randomization in it, would I not carry out my own beliefs of, well, carnivore works, so subconsciously picking people who are going to be, to validate that answer versus finding people who are going to invalidate it. And then even on top of that, if you pick, say, 500, 5,000 people, how do you know that those 5,000 people weren't like, had the proclivity to be pro whatever diet you're testing? So kind of the general thing is like, how can we trust, let's say, scientific studies done on humans whenever the placebo effect is a real thing?
Well, I think that's where meta-analyses are helpful, because that's also looking at
Mm,
an average of different studies and the quality of those studies, peer reviewed as well, right? So people who are evaluating it that are experts in that field, if they're doing research on, let's say, skin health, they're not going to ask a veterinarian, right? Like, so it's relative to the field. I think that's important. And looking at things longitudinally. So how long has this been going on? If they've really studied 50,000 people for 50 years, right? Like, the delay in research coming out to most people is 15 plus years to begin with on a good day. I think you make a lot of really great points on that idea of like placebo and what is this person, like what are they doing? I don't think that we have like a set answer for that. And obviously, with science and the government, as all the shit has gone over the past few years, like, I always joke with people, I'm like, we'll never know. Like, we are the like placebo controlled study right now. Like, we don't know. We won't know for a really long time. So like, jokes on everybody. And like, I always had like the slogan for 2020 was like, we'll see. We don't know. We all don't know. So it's kind of like, I think that you take it with a grain of salt, obviously. And then, I think understanding that there is a little bit level of a higher up, if it's something you feel super ardent about or very passionate or whatever, like, yeah, then dig deeper and look for. That's why even stuff like research on carnivore and all that, like, no offense, guys, but it hasn't been around that long yet. We have small amounts of research. Is it great quality? I'm not sure. I haven't like dug into it, like as much as, I to speak on it like at an expert level, but it's still really new. It's still very much so in the neophyte stages. So I think, we're even seeing that with things like probiotics, for example. For a while, a lot of the research was like, get all the CFUs you can and gut health, gut health, gut health. And now we're realizing like, no, it's about the strains actually and how specific those can be and what's going on with a lot of other things. So I think you have to take a step back as well and be like, okay, how long has this topic even been studied for, at what quality, with like what degree of a microscope, if you will. So again, meta-analyses, peer reviewed, that kind of stuff. And then we still don't really know, like, we're still never going to fully know. So that's just sort of the, asterisks with the field of science, I feel,
well, because
me
then it's
personally.
no, I mean, it's completely valid, and it even just kind of brings up in me this idea of, viewing the humanity like a human level consciousness, right? Like at some level we all have collective beliefs that we hold to be true, right? Like, for instance, humans can't fly, like, just hypothetically, right? And like there's these things that we just abstractly hold true. Now, who knows, maybe in 1,000 years we'll break through that level of consciousness and humans will be able to actually fly, but it's a little bit of a nuanced conversation where I
But
guess
we'll
I'm,
see, right? Like, we'll see.
uh, I maybe, like, if we find a way to use our brains to, I don't know, teleport, or, there's people who get all their nutrients by just looking at the sun every day. So
If Elon Musk wants to make it happen, it'll happen. When he wants to fly, we'll fly.
when it's up to him.
Totally.
And I guess where I'm trying to go with this is going back to like the study conversation is, if it was true at one point, it doesn't mean that it's going to be true now or in the future. So it kind of sets up this weird paradigm of, how do you know what to believe, which maybe brings it back to what we were talking about earlier, where figure out what's true, like figure out what that frequency of truth is to you, and then almost, okay, there's a new fad diet. Well, let me try it for a week or two. Okay, do I feel better or worse? Oh, I feel worse. Then let me just drop that. That's for someone else. And then kind of have that iterative process as new ideas or diets or routines or exercises or sleep or cold plunges come up into the human consciousness. This episode of Traveling to Consciousness is brought to you by Conscious Technologies LLC. Talk about an aligned company name. This company creating technology that will revolutionize the way that humanity is able to resonate or vibrate with the electromagnetic frequency of your phone, of your Wi-Fi router, of the light bulbs in your house, of really anything. What they do is they have created these amazing minerals, amazing units that you can either place on the back of your phone, you can wear it as a necklace, or they even have like little in-house generators, if you will, that can unify the entire field of an entire house. I've experienced these things in person, and I unequivocally can tell you that it does something, and it helps you feel more present, more calm, and more connected to the spiritual dimension, if you will. And I highly recommend that you also check out episode number 034, where I actually talked to one of the co-founders, and it blew my mind away. One of my favorite episodes, where we actually get into how he creates it, why it's created. And, you know, if this wasn't enough of a sell for you, go check out that episode, because I know that it will sell you after that. Conscious Technologies LLC, harmonizing the planet one person at a time.
Absolutely. So well said. I mean, and that, again, like back to my original point of like, build as big of a toolbox as you can. Science is a tool. Learning to listen to yourself is a tool. Cold plunges are a tool. Like they're all tools. And if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So it's about developing more tools for when you don't need a hammer at a certain stage of your life, you need something else. And that's where you can lean back on that. And again, have the foundation that like, cool, this is my jumping off point. I see this a lot, even when people first get into this, like, okay, I want to feel better, wellness space, whatever. And they're inundated with so many different viewpoints and philosophies and beliefs, because again, at the end of the day, everybody's version of their truth, to your point, is their truth. It's totally subjective, right? So like you are always filtering things through your own lens of what's been going on your whole life and how you've interpreted things and how you felt things and how those feelings have been subjective to you. So there's always going to be a little bit of bias and a grain of salt. So like that's important to remember. So even that, just like figuring out, what do I even like what kind of modalities am I into? If I really like the biohacking space, let me follow some of the top people in biohacking that I'm going to only listen to maybe 1 to 3 for now, so I don't get overwhelmed. I'm going to listen to all of that objectively, and then I'll find common denominators there. It's like when I was learning to cook focaccia bread, I remember I was like, I watched 12 different YouTube videos from everywhere from like a nonna straight up in like the south of Italy to like a bro in Brooklyn. And all of the videos, I was like, okay, this one said this and this one said this. And I found common denominators amongst the videos, that they all let the dough sit for this amount of time, or these people used this kind of flour, or these people, right? Like, so it's about, I think, doing that too. And then keep a lot of this health is the distilling down process of like, okay, where am I currently, and always checking back in and assessing an awareness. Where am I currently on my health journey? What do I need more or less of? How am I currently feeling? Like, where do I want to get to? What's not working for me anymore? What worked really well? And that, a lot of that, again, is not, there's not a 5-minute fix for that. There's not a supplement for that. There's not a 12-week shred program for that. So unless you're really willing to be fully committed to this lifelong journey of healing, you're going to keep looking for the new shiny object for the rest of your life. And that's going to ultimately not bode the results that you're truly intending to get.
So then how long, right, if there's a new shiny object and we consider integrating in our diet or our regimen or our routine, how long of a testing period do you usually give that? Is it like some of them you might feel instantly within a 30 minutes, like, oh, I probably shouldn't eat that ever again. Or there's probably some things where you might test it like a month or so. Have you been able to see with the clients or certain people where that average usually lies of knowing if something is good or bad for you? Or
At
maybe good or bad
their
increases or decreases, your baseline health?
Yeah, I think at bare minimum, 2 weeks is a really solid jumping off point. Like if you could do anything for 2 weeks and like really give it a go. I mean, think about gyms who give away like a 14-day free trial. Most people aren't even showing up for those 14 days consecutively in a row. So
Mm,
if you can consecutively 100%, nothing's ever 100%. So 99.8% show up at the level that you're really intending to commit to for 2 solid weeks. That is like the bare minimum. In an ideal world, I would say 90 days probably gives you a better overall assessment of what's going on. And a happy medium would probably be 4 to 6 weeks.
okay. It sounds like a pretty solid like time frame to try stuff out.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, it depends too. Like, yeah, if I'm trying to figure out a food allergy, if I eat a peanut and my face blows up, I'm not going to keep doing that for 2 weeks, right? Like, probably not going to be, let's use some deductive reasoning,
Yeah.
right? But if it's something
Handful
that's
every
going to,
day.
yeah, if it's something that's going to take a little bit more time, or, what I tell people a lot too is you have to meet yourself where you are. If it took you 6 months to dig yourself into a hole, you're not getting out of it in 14 days. It's just not happening, right? So you have to give time on the healing journey and also pay attention to secondary benefits that could be occurring as well. So let's say your main goal is weight loss. Okay, you didn't gain 10 pounds, like this again, tale as old as time, in 14 days kind of thing, unless you're willing to, starve yourself and go on this crazy whatever. So in the meantime, while time is passing and you're actively participating in cultivating your best life, like what else is improving in your life? Non-scale victories. Like, are you sleeping better? Or does your skin look better? Is your sex drive better? Like, so I think it's also having kind of that primary big picture thing is important too, of like, yeah, this is my main problem that I think, and it's usually never even the main problem. Like there's always, it's like emotions, right? There's a primary emotion and a secondary emotion. So there's always a main problem that you think it is. And it's really never that once you start like scratching the surface. So it's like, okay, what else can I also focus on and give myself praise for? Because a lot of it, as you've probably seen too, it's about gaining positive momentum. Like it's hard to
Mhm.
change even when you want to change. Like there's the analogy of somebody who goes into to buy a car when they want to buy a car and they still don't even leave that day buying a car. So you think you're going to sell somebody who's riding their bike to work every day to go and buy a car today? Like absolutely not. You have to kind of, like romance yourself, if you will, on whatever relationship you're cultivating, whether that's a relationship with food, whether that's a relationship with the gym, a relationship with yourself, with your, self-talk. I mean, they're all relationships, and pillars of relationships are all the same. Like there has to be reciprocity and respect and a courting phase and time and energy and listening and, editing and updating. So like it's really important to give some space to that time that's occurring.
It's well put. And I'm noticing kind of that we are mostly sticking on the diet aspect at this point. So if we were going to take a step back for a sec, you're a holistic lifestyle coach. So whenever somebody comes to you, is diet the first thing that you look at, or how do you, I guess, walk people through assessing their life of whether it's their environment, their friendships, their significant other, their diet, their exercise, their routine? How do you even start? If someone has no clue what they're doing or why they're doing it, how do you even, where do you even begin? Because I mean, myself at this point, so many things have just stacked up on top of my itself where, I can tell you the things I do, but I don't necessarily know the why. So kind of where is that starting point for people who are just starting out?
So by the time most people find me, they are at their health wits end. They have tried everything, they've done everything, they spend $10,000 on functional tests, blah blah blah. They've seen every doctor, every expert, every practitioner, and they don't know what else to do. So most of the time, I'm really not getting very novice people. Younger in my career,
Mm,
absolutely. I think I worked a lot more with people and the nutrition side of things. But now that's just something that doesn't actually even excite me. And I don't really work with people because it really is such a small part of what needs to be worked on, unless it's something that's deeper, like they have disordered eating or they have a poor relationship with food and so on and so forth. So I don't really get a whole lot of that. If people come to me for that, like I'm not writing a meal plan, I'm not writing your macros, like I just don't do that. I don't subscribe to it. There's other people who are experts at that. So by the time people come to me, I always joke, I'm like, as a nutritionist, I talk about nutrition probably 5% of the time, if that. That's probably being generous because it's a low hanging fruit. Again, it's never really about the food. It's just what people think that they can control the easiest. They think that. And at the end of the day, I think most people could agree, like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't like slam a pizza every single night, 7 days a week. Like or maybe if I have an option between, potato chips and like a real potato might be like, right. Like, so I make a joke of it, but like, I think there are some things that we could all come to agree on nowadays that people kind of, intrinsically know. So a lot of what I do is help people unlearn habits that don't really serve them anymore, and what is going on at the root cause level and where that interconnectedness is, right? Because anything affects everything in the body. So before anybody even works with me, number one, we always chat on the phone because it's a symbiotic relationship for both people involved. And I tell people, like, again, per our like conversation we just had, any relationship needs to be mutually beneficial. So like I'm energetically giving a lot to the person that I'm working with, and it needs to be a fit for everybody involved. So it's like people do the same thing with therapists, or again like a friendship or a romantic partner. It has to be a fit. And so I think that's sometimes also where people get frustrated. If you go to a practitioner where they're pushing their agenda or they feel really passionately about XYZ and you don't, it's going to feel like a struggle, and it's going to be just like a mismatch, and it's not going to work long term. So that's first. Second, after we both agree, like, cool, this is a good fit, we think we're going to work well together, everybody starts with a very, very thorough intake form process. My clients will definitely agree that they probably hated it at the time, but it's really thorough for a reason. And I ask a lot of the same questions in different ways because it allows them to see, again, self-assessment of where have I been lying to myself and bullshitting myself, and where are there themes, again, common denominators, buckets in my life. So I ask questions about, stress, emotionships, relationship, liver, adrenal glands, what's going on with your bowel movement, sleeps. Yeah, I ask what's going on with your diet, supplements, herbs. Like we get into all of it. And our first session is the deepest dive. If you've had lab work done, blood work, we're always looking at common denominators, how things are trending and where there are similarities, and kind of what the health hierarchy is of that. Because again, you might have 30 things going on, but if in your stress bucket, if 90 things are showing up on your intake form and your nutrition, like you're worried about the salad dressing you're using, we're not going to start there. So I think it's also prioritizing and creating sort of that health hierarchy. And we start from there. And then every week we kind of focus on, cool, we said we were going to discuss these next 10 things, but week one, we're just doing one or two things. And here's your homework. Like I give homework assignments to all my clients. That's the kind of student I was, where I want an actionable item because it's overwhelming to people.
For
So I'm
sure.
like, week one, we're doing this and we're only doing these two things. And then, in the middle of the week, there's always an emotional component I found with a lot of people. So there's always a prompt, a mental health prompt we're working with, something for them to reflect on, something for them to talk to either themselves or a voice memo if you're into journaling, whatever. And so a lot of it is really just helping people unlearn, break rules that they somewhere along the way form or adopted. And then really just, again, making it enjoyable for where they are in their current stage of their life. Like, the biggest thing is I feel like people have health guilt these days where they're seeing so many people. Like I see this with people's morning routines all the time, and they feel guilty because they should be doing this 90-step routine in the morning and being blessed by a shaman and doing yoga and journaling and being a good mom and making breakfast. And I'm just like, who has the time, right? Like, and then they feel bad when they can't maintain that for longer than 5 days. So it's also meeting people where they are and just giving them space to be like, you're doing a great job. Like the fact that you're even doing this, right? So sometimes people just need permission to be like, cool, I don't feel crazy because this, I understand now, the connecting, correlating dots, but I also understand like this is how I can make it sustainable and maintainable, and doing a slow drip approach to things not only that you're adding into your life, but things that you're taking out, because the unlearning process for a lot of people can be just as arduous, if not more difficult than adding new things in. People are so quick to just add in a new supplement, add in a new routine, add in a new whatever. And it's like a lot of it is really health subtraction, removing things slowly. And then while that's happening, it's that like recalibrating process the whole time. So it's like a little bit of a dance, like one step forward, two steps back. And we kind of just rinse and repeat that as we dig deeper, because again, they may have said session one, oh, I thought it was my adrenal glands. And we get into it and, they have really poor boundaries, and they have, negative self-talk, and they have pro-inflammatory thoughts. And that's actually affecting everything else that's going on in their body. And so we kind of just build on that every week.
It's interesting because actually, there were two things that were going through my head. Okay, well, I forgot one of them. The other one is and I picked this up from Dr. Jordan Peterson. There's a clip that keeps getting shared around, of him saying like, if you don't know what to do with your life, like sit on your bed and literally ask yourself like, what's the one thing I'm not doing that I should be
Yes.
doing? And you'll have an answer. And it's crazy because I do that and I have an answer, but then I'm always like, I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, that's because like that's the thing you should be doing that you're not doing. So I'm curious, like in that, when you're doing that outtake form, do people kind of fill it all out and then in your first session they're like, I know what I should be doing, like I don't know if I even need to kind of go through with this because I have just written out everything that I know that like now that I've put everything I'm doing on paper, I can see where I need to take this direction?
No, quite the opposite. They feel so overwhelmed that
Oh
they're
really?
just like, "Whoa, I didn't realize that this was such a problem in my life. I don't even like, how do I fix this now or where do I start?" Because then they see like, "Okay, I have all these opportunities to fix X, not fix, but you know what I mean? Like they think fixing or whatever,
Shift.
or work, yeah, shift, work on this, whatever." And so they kind of feel, "Well, where do I start?" It's like, having
Mm,
all the options. It's like packing for a trip. You're like, I have my whole wardrobe in front of me. What am I going to pack on this trip for this current destination? Right. And that is where people, and I think even if you know what you want to do, there's such power in having a coach or accountability or somebody, who you can bounce ideas off of, especially because I also get people who are very well educated. They probably could school me on some stuff. And I always tell people, like, listen, I work with an acupuncturist, like, I see a naturopath, like, because sometimes you're too far in it yourself. If you're in the burning building, you can't feel that you're getting burnt in it sometimes. So you need somebody to objectively pull you out. This is why people go to therapy a lot, is because they want to objectively not hear the opinion from a friend or their mother or somebody who has emotional stake in the game,
mm,
where it's somebody who's, and they maybe feel like they can share more than they have, where they can't do that with their partner per se, or maybe they're embarrassed about it, right? Like some of the deep, dark secrets that come up in that stuff where there's shame and guilt and these emotions that are just really misunderstood. That it's a lot of that is like that unpacking process and the accountability part of being like, yeah, I know I need to do this. It's like having a workout buddy where you're like, I signed up for 6 a.m. Pilates, like, and I told my friend I would go. I look like a dick if I don't go. So I have to, right? So if you're paying money, you're investing time and energy and finances into something, I would imagine that it kind of holds your feet to the fire a little bit more and that you just maybe care a little bit more. Even if you don't, psychologically or subconsciously, you think like, well, I kind of have to do this because I signed up. So I think
mm.
it's quite the opposite of what I found with people. Or again, because they actually finally get so excited that they are like, wow, nobody has ever put that together for me. Or a lot of the times I actually get people who say, this is the first time I feel like I'm ever being listened to. So many people just want to feel heard and seen and have a space held for them, especially when they've been doing so much of this, trying to heal and fix everything on their own. It gets really draining financially, energetically, emotionally, and they just want to feel like they're not going crazy and that somebody gets them. And you're just like, yeah, absolutely. Like your feelings are valid. And there's so much weight in that. And that I think sometimes can carry people through when they know what they need to do and they don't always do what they have to do.
Yeah, that seems like something that is kind of lost in today's society, and that idea of like holding space for people or being able to just listen and maybe not even, I definitely know this comes up in romantic relationships, but if and traditionally speaking, it's usually the girl who brings it to the guy where they'll kind of just start complaining about stuff. And I know traditionally guys are like, all right, let me fix it. All right, let me help. But even sometimes it's just like they just want to vent. They just want to get shit off their chest and like just be heard, right? Just to have that space to just kind of vent their thoughts to the wind and just, they're not, they either almost know the solution or they're not really looking for a solution and just want to be heard. And so I do find it very fascinating that that's even something that kind of comes up in your, I guess I'm not too shocked by it, but it definitely makes sense that it's something that comes up in your line of work. And I even know more so where there's this weird thing I think where just because like you almost can't hear it sometimes if you're too close to the person. Like if you're in a romantic relationship, it's a family member, and they could be telling you the answer, but you're either not ready for it or just because it's that person, it like doesn't connect with you. But then, once you're in a more professional setting and you're paying this person, it's almost like just that small dynamic switch they say the same exact thing that your significant other was saying, but yet now you get it because it's someone else in a professional setting relaying the information instead of somebody who you have an emotional attachment to.
Or there's a level of honesty there that, like, it's like when your girlfriends or boyfriend, like whatever, guy friends, you're venting to each other. There's three sides to every story, right? His side, her side, and the truth.
Mm,
And it's the idea of like, okay, what would you really say if this wasn't your mom or your friend, right? Like, you're always leaving out some detail or like, okay, how did you really participate there? Or what was your role there, right? And when we're telling our side of the story, we're not always doing that. So even if their answer on the, the side where they're hearing it, their intention is pure or whatever, you're maybe not being fully honest because you don't want to come off in a certain way, right? And so, like, I think that that is definitely part of it. And then, I always joke like, oh, well, once I told my mom, like, she hates you, like, in a dating sense, like joking, I'm like, and now I can't go back kind of thing. Like, then there becomes anytime I would go to her to vent about something, I already know how she feels. So it's like, I don't feel like I can open up in the way because I already know she doesn't approve and doesn't like it. Right. So I think that happens too. And maybe you've went and quote cried wolf to some of your friends and they're sick of hearing about it or they don't understand it or they feel like your problems aren't big in comparison to what they have going on because they're raising two kids and their marriage and whatever. And so people, I think, devalue sometimes what we're going through, and like you're the only person who can really put a value on that. So I think that objectivity and having that third party is really important for like everybody involved.
right. To have just that extra like ears or setup.
Totally.
Something I'm interested. You talked about this, and quick shout out to Christina, the channel Rice, because that was the podcast that I came across that I found you on. And in that podcast, and this is kind of sticking on the realm of relationships as well, you guys had touched on, and we can go deep dive into this, but I'm going to ask from my perspective first. You guys talked about how with like birth control that it
Mhm.
can completely mess up a female's hormones, so much to the fact that once they get in a relationship, they're on birth control, they get married, they're on birth control, now they want to have kids, they get off birth control, and then they're completely anti their husband. My question comes in is, as a guy, is there an appropriate way is there an appropriate way you've seen to ask a girl if she's on birth control without insinuating the ill intent, not ill intent, but your
Not coming off like a creep.
yeah.
I think I mean, you got to know your audience, right? Like, so I don't know. For me, if a guy brought that up to me, I'd be like, are we getting married? Because you want to talk about the neurobiology, like, so I don't know. I think obviously there has to be a little bit of know your audience, right?
This episode of Traveling to Consciousness is brought to you by Mushy Love. Mushy Love is a latte type blendable mushroom caffeine free elixir that honestly tastes like a liquid cinnamon roll. And I know that you're going to find that on their website, but it's honestly true. It's stacked with more than twice the amount of mushrooms as any other mushroom latte. And I know that there's one in particular that we all think about, which kind of starts with the word mud, but this one blows that one out of the water. I highly, highly recommend, if you even try that one, to just give this one a shot. And I promise you that you will not be sorry, because I just, it's so good. It's honestly so good. And I want to get to a place where I can actually they send me these all the time for free. So please go and buy it, because if you buy more, then they'll start sending me more. And it's just honestly a win-win, because it tastes amazing, like even in water. So even if you're cutting, even if you don't want to like put milk in or coffee with it, you can just do it plain in water. And it's so freaking good. Guys, go click the sponsors link below, scroll down to Mushy Love, buy your pack today. Remember promo code Clayton, I can't even talk right now. Promo code Clayton at checkout for 10% off your purchase. Mushy Love. Mushrooms shouldn't have to taste like mud. Give yourself some Mushy Love.
So if there's somebody who's really not into that at all, like, and that's not their jam, then I don't even know, it might fall on deaf ears kind of thing. Right. But I think with any relationship, obviously honesty is always going to be the best policy. So you might say like, yeah, like if you're getting more intimate and you're going to be engaging in that kind of stuff, maybe you say like, what's your version of, fertility awareness, or how do you, track your cycle? Are you doing fertility awareness method? Are you using something like birth control? I think that can at least open up the gateway to having that conversation if they're open to that. Um, and then see kind of where it goes from there. I don't know, but I also think like if you're worried, I have this internal battle with myself a lot about like romantic relationship stuff of like, yeah, but if I'm worried to say something, then that tells me that I'm like not being my authentic self. Obviously, again, it depends on the conversation, but like, when you're second thinking like a text, like, should I say this or should I put haha or not? And I'm just like, dude, I'm going to send it. And if they don't like who I am, then that's just too bad. And it's best that I find this out now. So obviously that's a
That's
fast
honestly
forwarded.
that's one of the most liberating feelings in the world, by the way. Just being
Yeah,
like,
like
fuck
it's
it.
a fast forwarded version of it, but I'm like, if you're going to think that I'm weird because like I don't want to put this kind of stuff in my body, or because I do this, or because I have crystals in my living room or what, like then we're not in alignment anyway. And it's better for everybody to just know that from the jump. So it's kind of like you're delaying sometimes, like this conversation is going to happen. So like, let's just do it now, let's rip off the Band-Aid now.
Yeah, and if everything bleeds out, then it was supposed to bleed out, so
It
just
was
get past
supposed
it.
to bleed out.
Yeah, we'll
Exactly.
just move past it. So another thing that you were talking about earlier, you were talking about how if a hammer's, and that's a great expression, if a hammer is the only tool you have, then everything looks like a nail. What are some tools that you have given or usually will recommend to people that have helped them completely change their perspective on health, nutrition, and lifestyle as a whole?
Well, first things first, I think it's trying all the different tools, right? Like you don't know that you don't like vanilla ice cream until you've had vanilla ice cream. So you don't know. But with that being said, there are certain things like I'm a really big proponent of acupuncture, cupping. I really love that. That's not going to work in one session. So that kind of goes back to our conversation of like giving time of like, okay, well, how long do I have to try this? And what is the reason or the intention behind why I'm doing it? So actually something I make a lot of my clients do in one of their very first sessions, one of their first homework assignments is I call it their anti-stress list. And so I make them write a list to start. It's like a living, breathing document of 10 things that, I want a couple things that on there that are like super reach. Like you're going to Peru with your best friend and you're going to do like a wellness retreat. And it's like the chances of that happening super dismal, right? And then have some really small things on there. Like I've had my eye on this new coffee shop and I want to go there. And that's a date I'm going to have with myself. Or I said I was going to rewatch this show on Netflix or whatever it is. So writing out this whole list of things, because that list starts as the basis of your toolkit, if you will. That's like your starter kit of like, okay, I don't really know what tools I like yet. So maybe on your list you put like, I'm going to go take a hike, like I'm going to walk, by the beach for 20 minutes. And you might realize from that planted a seed to be like, oh, I really like spending time in nature. What else can I do in nature? I'm going to sign up for a triathlon, right? So
Mm.
it's kind of always about following that string down too. So I think starting with a list like that of what can I do to kind of make me feel a little bit better? Or like if I have I call it like your shit day protocol, like things that can kind of bring you back into feeling, more in alignment or feeling better or what have you. And then from there, I think it's anything that makes you feel good. Like crying is a tool, right? Like crying on your floor and starfishing, that can totally be a tool in there. Listening to loud music, getting, wearing colors that make you feel good, buying a crystal, going to acupuncture, using different herbs that work well with your body, calling a friend, right? So I think even on your own toolbox list, there's even a sliding scale with that where, so for example, like acupuncture, maybe that's like the top level tool. I don't build, so I don't know what a good brand of tools is, but maybe that's whatever gold platinum package of a tool. And then you have something that's like a little bit like lesser, where it's again, it's, parking my car a little bit further away and I'm going to walk, or I'm going to listen to Abraham Hicks, rampage in the morning, or I'm going to learn how to do a new hairstyle tutorial, right? Because what we see is a lot of the times, this is where people do overly rely on external things, right? They think if I get this job, this boyfriend, this shirt, this whatever, I'll feel better. And what we're ultimately chasing, as you know, is the feeling. So, what's my intention behind me wanting to do this thing? And what are some other ways that I can get this feeling? So, I think anything can be a tool that you feel is going to get you closer into alignment with the feeling that you're ultimately trying to cultivate. So just keep an open breathing list and writing down anything. Think back retrospectively, like, when was the last time I felt really good? What was I doing? What was I wearing? What was I listening to? What was I drinking? Who was I with? Like, all of those things. How did I start my day? What time did I wake up at? Like, literally go back and do this log and really take time to be intentional about it and just write down everything and do a brain spill of sorts. And then from there, you can kind of start to bucket that into other things. And that can over time be your toolbox. And then eventually you'll like own a whole warehouse, and that's great. And then you can share that with your homies.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because then you can kind of try different things when you feel certain ways in order to shift the way you feel in certain moments of the day. And what am I thinking of? Oh,
No, that's so true though.
yeah. Yeah, because I mean, wouldn't it be great to just have a running list of, okay, whenever I'm feeling depressed, let me try this, let me try that. And then you can even just like assign a number value to it, 1 out of 10, of how well it
Mhm.
actually got you out of depression. Okay, I'm feeling guilty. What gets me out of feeling guilty? And it kind of can be that like automatic shift into like that next
Yeah.
overdrive, that next,
Yeah.
enlightened or blissful or joyful feeling that you can almost get to simultaneously. And I know for a while, one of my favorite things to do was like just to jump up and down, like hands overhead, like I just scored the winning touchdown of the Super Bowl. That
Yeah.
that really pivoted and changed my life whenever I just realized like, okay, let me just do that and then set my intention for what I want to accomplish. And it would like fly by. It was crazy how effective that was.
That is why it's such a bummer to me sometimes that I see these people, and usually it's positioned in a way like, okay, like you have, let's say you're millions of dollars, right? And you're pushing this product or this biohack or this lifestyle or whatever it is. Like, I saw an art, I made it actually a repost on Instagram. It was like, some celebrities, it was like their facialist 9 tips for glowing skin. And I was like, it's called being a celebrity. There's that meme about, like how Oprah stays stress free. It's called like being a millionaire, right? So it's also this idea of very like valuing things that are not super sexy or that you can do that are free. Like, I always joke and say that I'm going to open a rage institute one day where you can like rage clean, and like they have those things where you can, break things, or to your point, it could be jumping up and down. It could be literally screaming in your office. I mean, that's good for your vagal like tone. I mean, it doesn't have to always be this 10-star wellness yoga retreat with a shaman blessing you and giving you tea. And people think that that's where it has to go. And it's like, what's good in my now? And where can I build momentum off of that and do something that is small that's going to have a really positive ripple effect? Like, sometimes the smallest pebbles move the biggest boulders, and people just don't always value that. And that is such a bummer. Again, I think that part of that goes back into this like everyone's comparing game, and everyone thinks it has to be day in the life vlog and blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, sometimes you could just call your mom crying. If I had $1 for every time I called my mom crying on a bench when I had like squirrels judging me in the middle of a park, I mean, like, and then I would feel really
Squirrels
good about
squirrels
it.
judging you. What
Oh my
drugs are
God,
we
such
doing?
such judgy squirrels. I don't know. Some of the towns it's like a running joke in my family. I think it's because they know that I like have like beef with them or something. So they're always like judging me or whatever. But I mean, to your
Is
point,
this
like,
actual wait, is this actual beef with squirrels? Like, do they come up and fight you or something?
no, I've just lived in these towns where I have these really cheeky squirrels. Like this one town I lived in was called Ocean Grove. Like, I would send pictures to my family because they would like literally take pizza out of the trash can from my neighbors and like sit there and like make eye contact with you and eat pizza. Like, they were just wild and feral. So it's just kind of like a running joke with my family. But whatever, it might be judging. You might be a random person walking by. People are also so afraid of that, of like, let's say you're going somewhere and you're having a really rough go at it and you start like crying in the middle of Starbucks or something. Like, okay, you're not going to die. Like, you're not going to hurt other people. Like, it's fine to also just like do what you need to do kind of in that moment to feel that release. But that's why it is so important to cultivate such a lengthy list, because I think we've all been there. Like, you're having a bad day and you put on that song that usually puts you in a good mood and you just can't get into it for some reason. So you're like, okay, what else can I do? And if you don't have that what else can I do list, then that's when people can start to shame spiral and kind of gain, all of our thoughts gain momentum all the time. So it's like, how do we gain momentum in a positive manner?
Yeah, and kind of stop those. Well, maybe not stop, but almost embrace those negative, not even negative, but lower feelings or emotions more quickly. Because that's, I mean, something that's huge. I mean, it comes up in Atomic Habits, but even more, I mean, so many books reference it, even the Bible. It's, Jesus says, those who have some more shall be given, those who have none, all shall be taken. And it's literally that. It's literally the once you get that momentum going, it's going to keep going until you either divert it or, pull away. And that's really something that I kind of dove into more whenever it came to, stress or anxiety or, those lower frequencies, because I'm sitting there like, I can't, and this is where it could become a catch 22, is that you sit there like, I can't let this keep going because then momentum is going to build. But it's almost taking those emotions and giving it either love or nourishment or whatever it is it's seeking, and to realize that it's just kind of a part of it. It's like, oh, okay, like, this is going to pass, like we'll kind of get past it. And so it becomes this almost dance of like embracing it, realizing it, but then being able to shift it into either a creative energy or a more positive alignment energy.
Totally. I mean, I actually did my whole dissertation on anxiety and, the neural pathways
I
involved
was going to
and all
ask
these.
you what you did, so this is
Yeah.
perfect.
But so after that, I actually created a course off of my dissertation called Befriending Anxiety, because to your point, all of these quote bad emotions that people who maybe are not on this, consciousness, higher awareness, maybe they label it as a bad emotion and not necessarily, something that's serving them or out of alignment or lower frequency. So, all emotions serve a purpose, and all emotions are like, it's like the weather. That's kind of the analogy I always give. Like, you don't get mad because it's raining out, or just because it's raining out and you're mad about it doesn't mean it's going to stop. It's information. It says, oh, the last time that it was raining out, that told me that I should maybe bring a jacket, right? So it's about befriending it and figuring out, like, what is this actually trying to tell me? What is the primary emotion here? What's the secondary emotion? What is the feeling that's associated with the emotion? Because feelings and emotions are different things, are actually different parts of the brain as well. How is this impacting my behavior and mood? What am I trying to learn here? How have I participated? So there's so much more than just blaming it, of saying, this is a emotion and I don't like it, right? And so, like, it's really about sitting with that and befriending ones that we feel most uncomfortable with. And again, back to the context of relationships, it's why you vibe with certain people from a friendship level, even or not, because there's like this, yeah, we like kind of are on the same level about XYZ or whatever. And then, people will say things like, oh, I don't know about that guy. Like, I just got to give it some time. I have to warm up to it. I have to learn a little bit more. And then sometimes those people end up becoming like some of your greatest friends or some of your greatest teachers. They were really new to you and very, like, you didn't understand them and you couldn't figure them out and you couldn't put them in a box. So you were like, oh, I don't like this because I don't know how to manipulate it, or it doesn't feel
Mm.
comfortable. And our emotions are so much like that as well. We just don't always understand what they're trying to do. And the quicker that we just actually embrace them, let them into the door and say, like, all right, what are you trying to tell me here? Like, what's going on? What's up? The quicker they'll be able to leave or pass, or kind of, you can move through it. And I think that that's really important, to sit and befriend the emotions that you don't always love, because they're generally some of the biggest, and best teachers that we'll have in this life curriculum that we are all enrolled in.
Yeah, and the thought that's coming to mind that I've always kind of been proposed with is whenever I've been in those states of shame, guilt, fear, whatever, is that it's like society's default programming is to almost numb them, whether it's through medication or alcohol or, drugs, whatever you have. And I find that to be so fascinating as like, I remember, I think I was still in San Diego at the time, and a girl did a questionable thing, and like I brought it up to one friend of mine, and like it was one of those things where like she could have plausible deniability, but like we all knew, what was going on, and it hurt. And so my buddy's immediate reaction was like, "Oh, dude, like I know how you're feeling. Like take a shot, you'll feel better," kind of deal. And I remember sitting there with that, like physically, yes, I'll feel better, but then I'm releasing the potential to learn from this emotion or from this state, because then if I don't learn from it, it's just going to be the next girl that does the same exact thing. So why not sit there with this feeling that I don't like, to learn from it so that I don't find myself in this same predicament in the future.
Yeah. And that goes back to the, what you resist persists. But that also goes back to the adage of like, wherever you go, there you are. And so many times we just are repeating lessons in another location or another person or just another iteration of that because we're the ones that we have to take responsibility and say, well, how did I participate in that? I allowed that for as long as I did. Like I attracted that in on some level. And it's just so much easier for people to say, like, oh, well, they were a shitty person or they did that or that's a shitty emotion. I don't want to deal with that. And that's not going to necessarily change or evolve anything. Like if you want to get to that root cause or again, evolve and transmute that into something different, then you need to sit with it and take responsibility for like, how have I allowed this in my life? And that goes back to that whole like change happens when you're tired of your own bullshit, which is why we just kind of recreate the patterns and the cycles and all that because it's this familiar hell as opposed to this unfamiliar heaven. And people would much rather prefer this familiar hell. And they're just like, yeah, well, I know it's going to suck here. And this is when I start to fall back into this pattern. And, you can follow that. And your brain kind of likes that too, because it's sort of the same way as why people go back with gambling. It's like, well, I almost could win and I almost got that hit, right? And so dopamine works in reward and anticipation as well. So people do that in situations where they think they anticipate that it's going to be different and it's not. And that's what keeps people stuck in these patterns too. So it's really important to identify like, what was my role in this and allowing that. But that's an ugly process. People don't want to do that. People don't want to look in the mirror and you're like, wow, I was really toxic in that way in that relationship for a while too. And again, people always bucket relationships into romantic. And I am such a believer in that any relationship, whether it's your relationship with a client you have, again, a coworker, professional, whatever, like it's all the same foundations and the basis. And like they all have the same principles. So you need to make sure that you're always checking in and doing emotional audits, if you will, to make sure that like it's in alignment for you too, but also like, how did I play a role?
And even on that relationship topic, I remember when somebody asked me and they phrased it as my quote relationship with food. And that kind of almost broke me a bit too. I was like, wait, I don't have a relationship with food. Like I have relationships with people. I don't have a
Yeah.
relationship with food. And then like just that idea like opened up my mind to how many things I truly have a relationship with, whether it's my Instagram account, whether it's my laptop, whether it's my podcast, whether it's, coffee or food. It's like, oh shit, like I have completely neglected this relationship. No wonder I can't figure out what's going on in this realm or that realm or my body, my muscles, and so that even just that awareness of, yeah, you have so many more relationships than just people. It goes a lot deeper.
Oh my God. I feel so passionate about that topic because people just, I feel like that's where they do a lot of the work or they pretend to do a lot of the work on relationship stuff.
Call them out.
And right, to like on emotional relationship stuff, and they'll like read another book and listen to another podcast, and that's great. But it's like the roots of relationships. It's about feeling seen and supported. Is there, energetic reciprocity? Is there expansion? Is it actually beneficial for where I am currently in my life and where I'm trying to go in my life? Like, what is the energetic exchange here? I mean, there's so much that is ingrained in that people just it's all, of course, obviously all goes back to energy, but it also goes back to intention. Like, what's the intention of even salvaging this relationship or working on it? Because sometimes people just don't even know that. And I feel like if you can't even get to the bottom of that, then you're going to have a pretty difficult time in relationship because in any relationship, because those patterns bleed over. Like maybe for you, you hyper focus on one key area of a relationship, but there's always this string that kind of is tying us between all of these. And there's always themes that we are the common denominator. Like I am the problem or the main character in all of these issues. So where can I start to work on that and shifting and fixing and, admitting and being aware? Because life is a decision. Life is a series of, decisions, choices, and consequences. And that's just how it goes. And like that all starts with awareness and then deliberate creation. And that is a
Mm.
power that we cultivate, not other people, but we are just so quick to throw that onto somebody else, another person, another job, another relationship, but it always has to come back to us. And that's when you don't understand. All of a sudden, people have a mental, call it breakdown, breakthrough for the most random reason. Like that one day they can't get their contact in, they start hysterically crying, and then they feel like their world is crashing in front of them. It wasn't the contact. It was all the stuff that was piling prior that just pushed you over the edge. So it's like, let's get ahead of it and be proactive.
Yeah, that could probably be a very awakening moment in someone's life where a contact could get you to break down and start crying. But then
You never know.
you never know. Once it builds up, it'll build up until it overfloods the dam. So where you're at in your life then, whenever it comes to, let's say, lower frequency vibrations, shame, guilt, fear, what have been some of the tools that help you to either transmute those or figure out where you're not truly embodying your authentic self that brought in this negative energy? Or, like, does that make sense kind of where I'm going with it? Like, how have you found the ability to either transmute it or make the shifts and decisions, the change in decisions that you wish to embody to carry out and not be in repeating circumstances?
Yeah. So I think, at least for me, a big part of it is, so much of it is awareness and taking ownership where I need to. Because again, awareness and decisions and like that deliberate consciousness is always going to be really paramount. But also understanding, like, what am I ultimately trying to either avoid or get through? Or like, why don't I want to sit with this? Or like, let's say guilt, I feel like is a really, my whole life, my mom always said guilt is a wasted emotion. And like, so I say that so cavalierly as I've gotten older, because I've just always heard it and I've understood it more as I've gotten older. Because, for example, like, what I always tell people is like, listen, everything in your life that has happened up until this point. You can't ever should have done, would have done, could have done anything any differently, right? So it's about choosing how you want things to be different the next time. So focusing on the outcome that you think you're ultimately trying to get to. So like, if I'm okay, I feel guilty because I bailed on this person. Like, okay, well, people think that if they feel a certain way, it's going to change the outcome of what happened. And it didn't, because that already happened. So it's about, what can I do next time? What are the actionable steps that I can do to change the desired outcome or the feeling that I'm trying to attain or attract in my life next time? So a lot of that, unfortunately, comes back to me, myself, and I. How did I allow that? Why did I allow that? Right. And then, of course, doing what I call like your emotional audit. So, like, where are there, pro-inflammatory people, thoughts, energy, vibes in my life that are no longer actually serving me anymore? And doing an emotional, like an honest assessment about that, and realizing that energy is, of course, as you know, like your most important currency, and that everything pretty much holds energy, right? Like the photos that you have in your house, the clothes that you wear, the colors, the people, the places that you're in. So really getting very, I think, intentional about, how is this energetically affecting me? Like, it's a question I always check in with myself of like, is this infecting or affecting my energy? And then from there, I can kind of follow that string down and ask some other questions like, okay, where do I need to maybe sit with this discomfort? Is this a struggle that's ultimately a teacher? Where do I need to think big picture? Where do I need to think outside of the box? Like, so a lot of that is really just being inquisitive and just keep asking questions and just keep following the string down. And I think it's that process of just keep asking more and understanding that this is ultimately happening for me, but I need to like participate in really wanting to know the why and the intention behind things. So that's kind of what I personally do.
This episode of Traveling to Consciousness is brought to you by Aquarius Mushrooms. And Aquarius Mushrooms creates what I can only describe as these fine art sculptures that are all one of a kind, and these plush mushroom fabric sculptures. They're what I would describe as being like little trip buddies. They're perfect for anyone who has a room that is dedicated to spiritual adventures, or anyone who is looking for a fine piece of art that is one of a kind. I think I said that, but one of a kind, to enhance their psychedelic experience. I'm sober and I look at mine all the time, and it just oozes out this creative and spiritual energy that it's hard for me to stop looking at sometimes. And so if you are on even maybe just smoking some weed, like I can only see how this thing would open up a portal to a new world. So I highly recommend that you click the sponsors link below, scroll down where you see Aquarius mushrooms, click their website, and see if any of them speak to you. Because if it does, I can only imagine how it's going to speak to you in the real world. Aquarius mushrooms, mushrooms for the new age of enlightenment. No, that's a beautiful way to put it, because it's reminding me of something that I do, which I mess around a lot with my dreams, set an intention. I get a dream the night of, which like kind of answers the question in its own quasi way that I try to figure out. And where it gets super interesting is, and this has happened pretty repetitively, where, I'll ask a question along the lines of, I can't really think of one. So this is going to be a hypothetical. Why am I not seeing X million dollars in my bank account, right? And then I get a dream and it says, because you hold jealousy. And I'm like, well, where do I hold jealousy? And it's like, with this person, this person, this person. And it's like, well, what's the base root of jealousy? It's like, oh, you're not feeling embodied in yourself. It's like, oh, okay, well then how do I feel embodied with myself? And it's like, okay, you do this, this, and this. And honestly, at a certain point, I get so far down the list where I'm like, why the hell am I now talking about feeling joy and getting my, dog out of the crate or something, something crazy. And it's like, you're worried about $10 million. And then you follow the list down and it's like, oh, well, you don't pick up your clothes every single day. And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
what? It's like it's so wild to the conscious brain of like, these two things are connected. Like what, how did I get here again? And then you like refollow the path and you're like, okay, that checks out, but I don't understand why that checks out.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love doing that's why I love prompts so much. Like I give them to my clients, I give them to myself because for me personally, like I don't love journaling in the sense it feels too like forced. Like, okay, I have to sit down and I have to journal. I like things because the way my brain works in such a manner is that I want to think about something and ruminate on it and like let my brain wander the way that it wants to. So a prompt for me, it's like playing sports and you have a coaching cue, right? Your coach says something to you. You ultimately have to kind of figure out how to implement that and integrate that anyway. The cue is really important and it's a reminder and it brings you back when you're having those moments of feeling like you're out of alignment or you're not feeling great or you're having those lower frequencies. But it's like the prompt is what brings me back. It's kind of like my, my buoy, if you will. So like another one I always really like is the idea of like, how have my thoughts been lately? Right. Because watching your thoughts is a really important thing. So like, are these thoughts empowering me? Are they disempowering me? Like, do they feel good? Like what feeling do I want more of? I think it's Wayne Dyer who says like wisdom is avoiding all thoughts that weaken me, right? So kind of just always checking in with that. Like, how is this thought feeling person energy of affecting me, and then also just kind of reminding myself too that like you're always just one thought away from happiness or joy or love or abundance, because it goes back to that quote of like I think and I think and I think and I've thought myself out of happiness millions of times but never once into it. So it is true, right? Because the fake scenario you're telling yourself or the shame spiral that you've dug yourself into or whatever it is, like the negative what if game is just as true to your body as the positive what if game. So like, what if it could go better? What would it look like? What would it feel like if my dream scenario came, into my life right now? Like, can I even hold space for that? Like, what would that feel like? So again, it does go back to like, what is the emotion that I'm ultimately trying to feel or quote, get from this XY thing, or even running away from this XY thing. So like, how have my thoughts been lately, and kind of, following that string down too, at least for me, it has been really helpful. And like, what's taking up most of my energy right now? Like, what do I want to actually be taking up my energy, and using that energy as sort of a barometer for like my like North Star.
I really,
Because I don't know about you, but like I'm super sensitive to people's like being around other people. If you're like very sagacious and wise, like people love probably having you around, but you're just like, I don't know if I can hold the space for this or how I'm going to feel after. And everyone wants to pick your brain and what like, so sometimes I'm just like, I don't have the energy or this is not like energizing me. This is actually quite draining. And like the reciprocal energy flow here is not it for me. So I think always just checking in, like, what is the energetic investment here? Is this like a withdrawal? Is this a deposit? Like, is this a good ROI? So that is kind of how I'm always, this is why people hate making plans with me. I don't like not coming most of the time. I'm like, like, no, I'm in bed, but that's fine. So I'm sure you probably deal with that a lot too.
Um, try to think about it. I don't, because see, the way I view it, I started getting into human design recently. I'm not sure how much familiar you're familiar with it. And my thing is to like respond. So I'm manifesting
Mhm.
generator. So I kind of like my MO is to kind of just sit back and respond. And when people have a question for me, then I'll help them. But it's interesting. I think I fall more into a category of when people like, so I kind of just sit back and let the world unfold around me. And then when someone has a question, I give them an answer. I think it's interesting. I think that I kind of sit in this space of giving such a deep answer that people shy away from it sometimes, where
Yeah, yeah.
it's like, they'll ask me like why I do something or how I do it, and then I'll give them an answer, but it almost like goes too deep for them, and then they kind of shy away from asking follow-up questions. So I don't know. I mean, I guess you could see that as a good thing or a bad thing that, people who don't want to actually go down that rabbit hole, I tend to not get asked questions from. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the way that I see it, but I've definitely also seen where I'm in a certain environment, I'm around certain people, and you can just feel it. There's like a little clock that goes off, and it's like, yeah,
We're done.
this isn't helping me. This is hurting me more than helping.
But have you, I mean, obviously, this is the first time we're meeting. So I feel like by the time people get to this version of their consciousness evolution or call it whatever you want, like, has this kind of always been who you are? And have people who like grew up with you kind of been like, oh, that's just always how Clayton's been? Or are they like, whoa, this version of him is like way deep and I don't know how to deal with it? Or like, how have you kind of dealt with that awakening or ego death or that
Mm.
transformation of, old, new transition? Like, how's that been for you?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I've always been very inquisitive of,
Hmm.
everything from like if my parents were like, you have to go to bed at 8 o'clock. I'm like, well, why? Like, why do I have to go to bed at 8? And it always pissed me off whenever it wasn't an answer. Like, oh, I'm telling you to, that's why. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not a why. Like, that's
Yeah.
not valid. And so I think that I've always kind of had that almost, and I joke about this, maybe people would take offense to it, but I kind of joke about that I'm almost autistically curious about the why of things. And
Hmm.
and I think so much to a point where, kind of growing up, I was kind of in this quasi athletic nerd state. Like I was extremely athletic, but I also was very good with computer programming, math, physics, like both of those things were just like second nature to me. So it put me in this very interesting dynamic of like between, being super smart, but then being athletic. And again, I think growing up, I've also still always had kind of that like sit back and watch mentality where I'm more of the question asker, more of like the interviewer of just kind of seeing what's going on. And I love, like, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love when people have questions for me. I love answering them, but it almost seems as if, and I don't know if it's a conscious, I haven't really dove too deep into this energy, but at some level it seems like that's kind of just what's always been presented to me of this, like, my mission here is to kind of observe and just ask questions to help other people. And quite frankly,
Mhm,
that's where I've seen a lot of growth in other people, is whenever I've just asked questions as opposed to giving like this deep philosophical answer that would have all the
mhm,
answers. It's more like, there's almost like a continuous lesson here of me just like, okay, slow your roll and just like propose them with questions for so that you can figure it out. And then there's the ego that kind of steps in and is like, wait, I want to tell them. I need to tell them because they need to know. And then it's like, well, let's just let them figure it out. And so that's definitely an internal battle that kind of, I think has always kind of been there. But maybe where it has kind of come full circle is the element of me that was maybe more of the ego, unhealthy and unintegrated, was more
mhm,
of just like telling people how it is. Kind of, I feel like you have that energy as well, where you just tell people how it is. And so I think it pushed people away, to the
mhm,
extent of like, well, I don't, like, I'm not trying to anger you, but like, this is just the way I see it. This is the way that it is. And it,
mhm,
it didn't have that empathetic, sympathetic piece to it. It was kind of always missing that little bit of like glitter on top of it for, someone to actually enjoy it. It's like, I'll give you all the ingredients, but now it's more like actually baking those ingredients into a
Yeah.
cupcake that someone actually wants to eat.
Yeah. I always joke, I always say your meanest friends are your realest friends, and I think that's very much so an East Coast thing, because when I lived in California, that was obviously not the case. Um, but I also, like, to your point, I think Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot, the idea if you're talking and somebody's not listening, stop talking. So I'm never the
Yo.
person to give my opinion or advice unwarranted, don't cast pearl before swine kind of thing.
Mhm.
But when you ask my opinion and I'm like, okay, do you want the truth, or do you want what you're looking to hear? Because I'm not the friend who's going to just, confirm what you want to hear. I'm going to give it to you real. And so, not all medicine tastes like Kool-Aid is what I tell people. So I'm like, listen, this is not the Kool-Aid version. So I think that's why I'm really
About to get the cherry.
protective. Yeah, yeah. So I am super selective about that. I'm definitely not one to just be like, this is my thought and my opinion, and here's my philosophy. Because I think that does happen a lot in the spiritual conscious world, where everybody wants to be the Dalai Lama. And I'm like, dude, you have not put in the reps. Like, you have not done that. So you haven't like earned that yet. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you've had some trauma, but so I mean, I think it's important too to like sort of know where that role. And I think so much of that does go back to ego too, and humility of being like, this is not my shit to flush, number one, and this is really not the place
Mm.
for me to step in if it hasn't been asked, and also if you're not listening. Like, I have been like very defiant on that with some friendships I've had in my life, where it became a very one-sided friendship, where it was like, yeah, they wanted advice or my opinion or whatever, and then after a while, like, just straight up people not listening, and then they would still complain about their same problems, and I just do not have tolerance for that in my life. I have empathy and sympathy for you, but it's not something I want in my like circle and my energy field. So like, I've just cut relationships like that off because it's not mutually beneficial, it's not serving me, and it's ultimately draining me. And people might think that that's callous, but I think the effect you have on others is like one of the most valuable currencies that there is.
Oh, for
And so like,
sure.
I know the effect that I have positively on others, and if that's not reciprocated in some way, it's not like, give me this and I give you that. It's an energetic exchange, because energy is everything. And so I think that is a tough thing sometimes. That's kind of why I asked you that question, because I think sometimes in this journey for people, as they kind of get more into it and they have, I think, in Buddhist philosophy, they call it satarai, which means like instant awakening, right? So people all of a sudden have it and they feel so stoked about it. And then like they look at everything else and they're just like, oh my God, is my life a lie? Like, I have to get rid of this, or I have to do this, or I have to change this, or like, should I start wearing beads and, whatever? Like, so I think it's kind of, for some people, it is slower like boil, and then for other people they're just like, no, this is actually who I've always been. Like, to your point, I've very much so been the same way. Like, I've always been super inquisitive. My mom calls me the question grape, like, ask a bunch of questions. And then I think you just kind of ultimately become more of who you are in a way that feels more like expressive and aligned.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because even it's so fascinating too that the idea of questions and asking good questions is actually something that's been popping up quite a bit in the last 3 days for me specifically. And I'm even kind of looking back at the relationships that I've formed, because I left Pittsburgh, went to San Diego, came back to Pittsburgh. And so, I created some new friendships through jujitsu. And it's always been very fascinating. Again, being that person who sits back and watches how other people interact, the people who like go up and say hi to people, the people who kind of just sit back and people come up and say hi to them. And it's just always been so fascinating to me, because I don't know that many people come up to me initially to say hi. And I don't know if it's, being, 6 foot, 220 pounds, or, and being
That'll do
bald.
it.
Yeah, that'll,
That'll probably do it.
that'll shy people away. And so what I've kind of found is it's almost like it's almost this propellant for me to go out of my way and say hi, or even take more of a question approach of like, oh, how's your weekend going? And then they give you an answer. And at a certain point, it can start feeling like you're pulling teeth. And that's kind of where I've realized to pull back. But overall, like, I don't really specifically see people going out of their way to come up and say hi to me. It's almost like this weird dynamic of me needing to reach out to engage the world, but then at the same time kind of settle back and wait for things to respond. So it's an interesting dynamic that I've been playing with or seeing in my life over the last week or two.
Is that a common preconceived notion for you amongst people who don't know you, that you're, like, either not nice or maybe you could be, I don't, because you, like, like, what's kind of a preconceived notion that people would be like, "No, that's actually not it at all for me."
Um, I'm not sure. The first thing that's coming up is I know whenever I was in San Diego, there was like a 1 month period where some of my best friends, well, the majority of the ones that told me this were girls, and they all said within like a month period, it was like five of them, were like, I hated you whenever we first met, but after getting to know you, I consider you like one of my best friends in San Diego. And
Yeah.
after hearing that like 4 or 5 times, I like actually started proactively asking people in my circle about that, and they're like, "Yeah, yeah." And then I even asked my parents, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we always were curious like how you were actually able to make friends." I'm like, "What? Why was this never brought to my awareness beforehand?"
Probably because you're authentic, so that's triggering to people,
Mm,
or you make people think about questions that they don't want to think about, or they're, that's like, that's that draw that they close, and you're like, "Wait, let's just look in here." And they're like, "No, no, no, no." And then
yeah.
they end up loving you for that.
Oh, for sure, because yeah, because again, this kind of goes back to that jokingly autistic version of myself where I can see all the inner dynamic energies and things that occur with people, and then and this was even before like my spiritual awakening, dark night of the soul, all that stuff. And I think I just naturally would be like see the pressure point and almost like just want to poke it, just be like, all right, why does this do
Mhm.
this? Oh, why are you getting mad about that? Like that wasn't my intent. And then I'm sure sometimes like the ego kind of comes in and it's like, all right, we're gonna actually fuck with this person. And but what can you do, right?
What can you do? Have an interesting relationship with your ego is what you can do. Oh, the ego.
Yeah. What's your relationship like with your ego?
Oh, that's been an interesting relationship. I think my ego was very misunderstood. Or I didn't fully understand like what ego meant on a deeper level, because it does really get cast as a really negative thing, and really, because there's, I think, not great attributes to it. But um Dr. Wayne Dyer, like my whole life, my mom has always read me Wayne Dyer and Your Erroneous Zones. And like that was always a joke. Like most kids were getting Mother Goose, and that's the kind of stuff my mom was reading me. So it's been like seeping deep into my brain. And it's funny because as an adult, the chapters that I really liked for her to read to me when I was a kid are the same chapters that really resonate with me now as an adult. And a lot of the themes were always about surrendering, like loosening your grip on life, going with the flow. And a lot of it was this like ego based thinking of, your validation comes from external things. And, same thing. I was really good at sports. I was really good at school. Like, so you get a lot of that from a very young age. And so you think that your worth is based around that. I never cared about like the comparison game of like, oh, somebody's doing this, so I have to do that. I was always actually quite the opposite. If everybody was doing something, I was like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to like it, whatever. But very interesting in the sense of that did have a very hard time with control stuff, because I wanted things to be on my timeline, how I wanted it to be. Like very much so this dance of surrendering masculine, feminine energy was something that I struggled, I think, a lot with, especially younger in my career. And it's been interesting to see, like, again, as I've gotten older, those have been the things like, when you like open a book and you're just like, okay, what does the universe want me to read today?
Mm.
Always, it will be on stuff like that, like surrendering, flowing, letting go. What's your relationship like with endings? All that kind of stuff. So it's kind of always been an undercurrent for me that I think I've gotten a lot better at being able to identify it. I call now your ego, it's like your super annoying frenemy, where you're just like, oh, Annabelle's back. And you're like, okay, she's trying to do this and like pull me out of this mood and whatever. So I've learned to identify it a lot more and just be like, cool, I see what you're trying to do here, but like this is a very short term game and I'm not interested in participating. So thank you, next.
Mm. That's interesting because it's making me think about when my ego seems to appear. It's like whenever I want to say something real bad in a
Mhm.
conversation, and yet for some reason people keep like just talking right whenever I was going to say it. You know what I mean? And so it's like this thing that I just want to say, and it gets to a certain point in the conversation where we're completely past it being a legitimate thing to say, but I'm still gripping and holding on to this thing that I want to inject in the conversation, and I tend to hold on to too long. And I've been getting really good at just like letting go of it. And if it's meant to be said, I'll
Mhm.
say it later. But whenever, it comes back to that, like the letting go and the surrendering, because if you hold on to that thing, whenever it's my turn to talk, whenever it's the right time, that's what I'm going to say. And it's probably not even going to be applicable for that point in the conversation.
Yeah, I struggled a lot with letting go and the idea of, I guess it's more so your relationship with endings in general and what that means and sense of control. And then I don't know, I kind of just like totally reframed my relationship with that of it's this idea of like, right, but that's how you create newness in your life. And it's like the idea, which is so interesting because, I think a lot of Taoist philosophy talks a lot about that, like emulating nature and seasons and ending and things like that. So it's like that idea of like, the degree to which you can let go of your old life is directly proportional to the speed at which you can get your new life or new chapter or whatever. And I think like the second I reframe that about like this creating new space idea of like, yeah, if you want to get a new couch, you have to get rid of the old couch, like kind of thing, or you want new clothes, you got to empty out your closet. And that for me, like just totally like years of having issues of, when my mom would be like, just you have to let it go, Brie. And I'm like, what does that mean? Because I'm a very like, cool, I love the theory, but I'm also like, what are the next steps? What's my homework assignment?
Yes.
Like, I want to be a good student, right? So when people would say things like that and Eckhart Tolle and like, reading all that stuff, and I'm like, but what does that mean? I'm like, how do I just let it go? I just drop it? Like, what does that mean? And
How do
then
I
for
do that? Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like, is there a prompt? Is there like an app I
Yeah.
can download? Like, is there a support group I can join?
That is exactly my issue. It's just anytime, back to the whole like analogy I had earlier with like $1 million, like just tell me I
Yeah.
need to clean my room. Just tell me what I got to do to get, I don't care what it is. I'll just do it. And, to that point, there's that element of actually just like resting and receiving and surrendering to the
Oh my
now.
God.
And I'm just like, what in the fuck does that even mean? Like if I don't
Yeah,
do something, nothing's going to get done. Like, and if nothing gets
totally.
done, then how is anything going to happen? And it's like, fuck, like, so I do like that reframe you're saying of like just it open by letting go and letting things die, it allows room for newness to come in. This episode of Traveling to Consciousness is brought to you by Revive CBD. Now, I know what you're thinking. Another CBD product? And typically, I would completely agree with you. I've gone through all my trials and tribulations with CBD products, but this CBD cream is unlike anything else. Honestly, I don't know what it is, but there's something in the technology of it that it helps absorb into your skin and actually get to the place that aches and soothes your muscles almost instantaneously. It's close to instant. It's probably about a 5 to 10 minute activation that I've noticed, but sometimes it goes a little bit quicker. And so I know it can be difficult for find the right one. And this was my personal favorite that I found after long enough. I don't want to go back to that dark time, but I found it. It works amazing. And the creator of it is an incredible guy. So I highly recommend you click the sponsors link below, click on the Revive CBD tab and get yours today. Revive CBD. Feel better, live better, all premium, all natural CBD products.
Totally. It's so funny. Like my friend, one of my best friends from California, Rocio, and we always joke about this idea of like, yeah, trying to let things go. And then like this idea of it's like wanting to always heal to the best that you can and like winning at like healing or winning at therapy. And it's like there is no winning. And that's the ego in
It feels
itself of
over
this idea.
masculinized. It feels like you're masculinizing surrender.
Oh my God. Yeah. So we even joke about that about like, so the energy of receiving, like, which is very in alignment with abundance and this idea of like not even being able to take a compliment, being the first one. And we would do it with each
That's
other all the
huge.
time, being like, oh my God, you look. So even just like, and I know Christina talks about this a lot of being, if somebody says something like, you look nice, instead of being like, oh, me, no, I don't look, you look better. And being like, no, thank you. I received that without having to do it, say something back or whatever. And that was, when I even did that, the idea of, okay, like receiving a compliment, asking for help, those were things that were so hard for me. So I like made it a practice to say, okay, Brianna, I am going to ask for somebody to hold my jacket while I'm in line. Sounds so small and silly, but was such important for me, like an important prompt for me to be like, cool, that's allowing me to be vulnerable or to be open, to be soft, to have softness and yeah, balancing the masculine and feminine. So like even small things like that, receiving a compliment and not saying anything back or being like, and I got this shirt from, wherever, because as people do. So that even once I changed my relationship with that, that was also very interesting, a big shift for me with being able to like let go and flow, I think more in surrender because it kind of all like, they kind of all hang out together.
Yeah, that compliment piece. You're hitting home. You're hitting home for me there.
Tough one.
It's so wild. And I've seen it, this is where it gets interesting because I've been living with my parents and it's so interesting to see it play out with them where, if I give my mom a compliment, like her first thing is to like detract from it. Like there is no
Mhm.
thank you, I receive it. It's just like, hey, dinner's well. Oh yeah. Like not even thanks. It's just, oh yeah, like I should have taken it out a little bit earlier or I should have left. And it's that pivot. Like you can feel it, especially if you give someone
Mhm.
a compliment or you receive a compliment, right? And then just say thank you and sit in that. Like that felt
It's
so
so
weird.
hard.
Yeah, it felt
Oh
so
my god, it's like
weird.
probably the most awkward thing even like, like when you're dating or something and someone says something nice, just be like, "Thank you." And then, like, moving on and being like, "So
Yeah.
what else?" Like, it is I think it's a vulnerability thing for sure, and I think it does go back to that idea of I know for me too, I struggled a lot at being a recovering people pleaser, and that all goes with boundaries and people pleasing and, like, all of that and self-worth, right? Like, it's all tied together, and so the idea too of just being like, "Yeah, no, I am worthy of that, and I'm, like, deserving of that, and I don't have to give you something back or do something back or be the performative, like circus act to feel worthy or love, which I think goes back to like doing really well in sports and school. And like that's how I got a lot of praise. And, so it was like really sitting with that and untangling a lot of that of like, why do I feel like I have to do anything except say thank you and receive that? Like, where did that come from? Not like that totally came from me. My parents never made me feel that way. Like anybody, like that was just on me for whatever reason. So once I even just sometimes it's not even always about figuring it out. Sometimes it's just like head nodding it and like acknowledging it and be like, I see you. I got it
Yeah.
now. Like you're not a problem anymore. And then you just give it the space to like do its thing. And that for me was, I think, just so like I physically felt the change in my energy once I did that.
And something that's speaking of like physically feeling the energy change, I'm thinking in this in returns to the ego as well, because if someone comes up to you and just keeps giving you praise and praise and praise, you would think that that would feed your ego. But if it truly was feeding your ego, you would almost be okay with it. You'd be like, "Yeah, I know.
Hmm.
Like, thanks." Like, "Yeah, I know." Like, "Clayton, you're so
Yeah.
amazing. You're so great." Yeah. Like the ego's like, "Yeah, I know." But there's almost this weird mechanism where it's not ego and instead and maybe for some people that feeds their ego, but at least for me and it sounds like yourself, it's almost this just inability to receive the praise. It's like even the ego is blocked from receiving that information to, kind of sit and bask in that.
Yeah. The ego's like, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. That's on you. We'll be back
S-
later to try and pull you down in another way.
Like, bro, just take this. This is you. This is for you right here. Let's go.
Yeah.
Pick it
Be
up.
like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? Shame, guilt. I'll take anything
Yeah.
else but a compliment.
Yeah. Oh, that's wild. How did you see that like pivot throughout your life? Like when did you acknowledge that you weren't able to receive? How did you fix that? And then how has that like changed your life?
So my friend Rocio, we always joke, we say that we're the blind leading the blind and like our eyesight's just not getting better. Like that's kind of because we are very much so and like any relationship is a mirror for what you ultimately have going on with yourself and a reflection back. So we're basically always giving advice to each other but to ourselves. And we're always generally going through the same thing just in like a different timeline or kind of like a different dialect or what have you. And so a lot of the times it's and if somebody doesn't have a friend to do that with, let's say, I think it's that idea of like, I always joke like coaches don't play, like the people who give the best advice don't take their own advice kind of thing.
Mhm.
So just a simple prompt of being like, if this was my friend going through this right now, or they were dealing with this, like, what would I say to them? So it's like, even call it havening or reparenting yourself or whatever, just, giving yourself that kindness and space and grace and, lovingness. And I think it's just, we're so hard on ourselves. And I think I actually reached a point where I was probably in like my late 20s. I'm 33 now. I was maybe like 28, great space in, my career, like felt like I was crushing it, like go, go, go. I like being busy, all of this. And I remember like saying to my mom, I was like, I can't sustain this. I was like, if I keep going at this rate, by the time I'm 30, I will absolutely like just burn out. And so for me, I had to really take a hard look at myself and be like, why do I feel like, and I moved around a lot too in my like 20s. Like I lived in Colorado and California and Connecticut and Spain, like all really cool things for really cool opportunities, career stuff. And like it was amazing. But at the same time, it went very much so back to that wherever you go, there you are. And at some point I was like, okay, I was thinking about, I remember like leaving California and I wanted to move back to New Jersey, and like it was on my terms finally. And it was like, I kind of just felt like I had to sort of sit with why did I like what was I running away from, or why did I feel some of these really strong emotions that kept coming up. So it was a little bit of being like I can't sustain this anymore, of like always running, always being on the go, never being soft, never being flexible. I was like that I will just burn out. And then I also started being like I felt like I was attracting in people, and particularly for me relationships tend to be my greatest teachers or catalysts for teachers, and I kept like attracting in patterns that I just did not want. And I was like participating even though I really didn't want to. And I was like, all right, I can't keep doing this either. And I was like, so I need to really take a very hard look at what I'm allowing. And it's like the character of your choice kind of thing. And so that is when I had to really sit with it and be like, all right, I got to like really sift through that. So I think it was me, a combination of all of that. And then that idea of like the only way through something is forward, right? So I was like, I have to move forward with this, and I have to like leave what's in the past and just kind of cultivate newness in my life.
And so then that was the motivation to cultivate newness. That was what helped you to pivot into receiving compliments?
Yeah, like this idea of like, I just didn't want to keep living that way. Like, I felt like I wasn't cultivating the kind of relationships that I wanted, or everything in my life started feeling so one sided or feeling so not reciprocal. I felt so
Mm.
drained all the time energetically. And I was like, so what's going on with me? Like, what are my patterns that I'm allowing? Or when I would go, let's say, even hang out with my friends, like, why would that? Because I would never, why would I feel so tired when I came back, or like bail last minute or whatever? And it was like, because I felt like when I was there, I couldn't fully enjoy myself or be present or receive whatever it was, because I felt like I had to be on and like funny and bubbly and whatever. And I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so it was like just straight up like, I just don't want to do this anymore. And that was kind of where I had to really reassess like the masculine feminine balance in my life. And I think I started realizing more that like receiving abundance, all of that, allowing, surrendering are much more feminine energies. And I had to really work on recalibrating and rebalancing that.
Mm. And so you realized that you were over masculine in the giving of your time, your energy, and never truly receiving anything back from other people.
Totally. Yes. So that went back to boundaries, people pleasing, self worth, of course, like so on and so forth.
So then what practices are you doing now to get yourself into the state of receiving, and how often do you try to put yourself in a state of receiving?
I will straight up now, like if somebody says something nice or does something nice, like I have to consciously say, thank you, I received that, which I don't think I'll have to do that forever. But for now, I'm still like, I'm training that,
I'm still there too.
neural
Don't worry.
circuitry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm working on that. And then also actively just reminding myself when somebody does something kind, like I would be the first person to do anything and everything for the people that I love, like with never wanting anything in return. And so for me, it was looking at my relationship with self worth. I'm like, why don't I feel that I'm worthy enough to just have somebody want to do something nice for me, whether it's a compliment, receiving a blessing, receiving a kind word, like whatever it was. So just also seeing where the idea of receiving an abundance could come in other things besides just, let's say, a compliment. So receiving health, receiving wisdom, receiving like a good experience, a good energetic exchange. So really just kind of opening up my box, if you will, or my boundaries with what that even meant to me. And then actively, like if somebody does something quote nice or feels like they're, doing something kind, like being like, thank you. And that's it. And like actively stopping myself from having to go right back into my old patterns of being like, and now let me do this for you. Like wait
Mm.
3 business days and then you can do it kind of thing. And that has been really tough for me. And like but it's also been like an exercise that I have found helpful for me, where it feels now when I do get compliments or somebody does something nice or they help me or whatever, it feels like I'm not bracing it so much, like I'm embracing it. And that idea, like how I said to you earlier, like forcing myself to do little things that put me into modes of receiving. So like asking somebody, can you get this for me on the top shelf? And again, it sounds really silly, but those little positive things build positive momentum. It's like, I think there was that guy who did it on Instagram. It's like the rejection theory, where if you go and like ask 5 people a day out and like all 5 of them like say no, you kind of become impervious to the
Mm.
rejection. So again, this idea of like a numbers game. So it was really just also like learning to ask for that and knowing that I'm worthy of receiving that with nothing, no strings attached. And I don't know if that's an East Coast thing, kind of like, I don't think everybody gets that, but like this idea of like, yeah, I did this for you, you do this for me, one hand washes the other kind of thing. Like I never could resonate with people in California on a deep level with that kind of stuff. But when I talk to a lot of my like homies on the East Coast, especially like I'm Italian, like I don't know, that kind of just resonates with me too. So that's like my own working theory that I have about it. Um, so yeah, kind of just working through some of those things.
Maybe there is a connection there because I mean I'm East Coast and also Italian as well, so I wonder if there's a connection there.
Yeah, I think it goes back to intimacy stuff, like I know at least very traditional Italian cultures, like you weren't talking about your feelings and emotions, like you weren't going to therapy, like you weren't,
Oh, you just
that wasn't
ate
it. There
you
was
ate them
love
away.
and yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have a cannoli, you just shove that down,
Yeah.
like take the
Yeah.
cannoli, leave the emotions is what you do,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
that was your pediatrics is yeah, jump to the cannoli
Exactly.
stand.
Yeah. So I,
Or
I do think that
tiramisu.
there is some cultural stuff in there and some like where you're from kind of stuff, like, and I'm sure that it will offend a lot of East Coast people, but I actually never found any deep connections really with anybody from California. I lived there for almost 4 years. Um, I felt a lot of it was like sounded good on paper, like cool. You read a lot of self-help books and you have like a Reiki healer, and I get it. And there wasn't like that level of authenticity like there is on the East Coast and this like ride or die mentality and whatever. I don't know. So that's kind of my own theory. And I feel like East Coast people get it and West Coast
I could
people
see that.
get offended by it?
There's definitely something to it. Like I know the big way it manifests is like whenever you would meet people visiting San Diego, it was always, "Oh my gosh, everyone's so friendly here. I'm from New York and like you don't talk to people on the elevator or on the side of the road, but here everyone talks and is friendly," which is really fascinating that I guess that would perpetuate or manifest itself up because I feel like there's still that underground bedrock of exactly what you're talking about, but then on the surface level, it's like I don't know, the surface level, and maybe there's this like West Coast, it's more surface level friendly, but then East Coast, you kind of need to penetrate down into it to actually create that foundation.
But once you have that, like, you're homie for life. There was actually somebody who did a video or they did something about they're like, this is the main difference between the East Coast and the West Coast. They're like, if you're on the East Coast and you get a flat tire, someone will be like, oh my God, you're an idiot. Move. Let me fix this for you. On the West Coast, you get a flat tire. Somebody's like, oh man, that's a bummer for sure. That sucks. Right on. Have a good day. And they don't help you. Right. So it's like
Mm-mm.
that idea of this like very deep. I think on the West Coast, again, at least is from my experience, I was able to talk about things on a much broader scale. Like, yeah, you could talk to the random person on the corner about like, what crystal did you get? And like, where do you go for IV therapy? And like, what tonic do you take for your liver? Like, that was so common. Where here, you don't get that. People are like, what is going on here? But the loyalty, ride or die, like deep kind of stuff, I felt like I just couldn't get that out there. And for me, I was also at a place in my life where that's what I felt like I was really, really missing was like that authenticity back to my original point of like so much of this healing journey is just trying to come back to your most authentic self. And I spent all of those years in my 20s, like I joke and call New Jersey the boomerang state. I left, like, I moved across the country and back 4 times, like,
Wow.
and I kept moving back to New Jersey. Like, so I think it was that idea of like really wanting to get back to my roots of like, okay, back to my intentions. Like, what is it that I really value? What's important to me? And that's my theory on that. I don't really know how we got there, but
I don't know how we get anywhere, honestly, on this podcast. Usually have to re-listen a couple times. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
I see that.
Uh,
Okay.
but it is interesting, and this is something I guess because I've always been telling people that I'm gonna make it back to San Diego, gonna make it back to San Diego. But lately I've been like, I don't know if that's like where I'm supposed to go for sure. I mean, again, beautiful people, beautiful weather, but then, there is that element as well as like, well, is there other stuff to check out? Is there another city that's calling my name? So it's definitely a very interesting dynamic of trying to figure out those big questions in life.
I believe you should live as many places as you can while you can so that you know where you want to plant roots. Like,
Mm.
I'm a really big, while you still can, like, right. I think it's easier when you don't have a lot of, maybe you don't have a family to take with you or like a a job that you have to be at, whatever it is, right? Like, so if you have the opportunity, like throw enough things out there, eventually something will stick kind of thing. And everything, I think, if you're open to it, can be an opportunity to get you to the next right step of where you ultimately are going to end up anyway. Like you always end up where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, my chiropractor in San Diego had a really interesting outlook on this because he ended up actually moving back to New Jersey from San Diego as well. And he said though that he believes you can find every type of person wherever you live, and he was well traveled. You can find any type of person wherever you go. You just got to figure out what you want the background to be of that, situation. And to me, it feels like there's a lot of truth in there, especially coming back to coming back to Pittsburgh with this spirituality mindset and still finding people who actually want to talk about. I
Totally.
didn't think that existed on the East Coast. I didn't think we were allowed to discuss that on the East Coast. So
Yes. A little bit more far and few between, but that is one of the benefits of social media. Like, what are the, if Instagram didn't exist, we wouldn't be having this conversation, like I don't go to Pittsburgh. So like, when would we have met kind of thing? So I think that that is what is nice about these like subcultures that have kind of formed on the internet, is that you can connect with people. Again, people want to feel seen. You want to feel like people just get you and understood. So it's nice to have that community, which you can now have literally anywhere in the world, where maybe it was more difficult, back then.
oh, it's so true. No, it's so true. And I was just talking to Christina about this and here actually an extension of it, which is pretty funny. There was a
Yeah.
buddy I, would party with in San Diego. And so I brought him on the podcast, and then he introduced me to Teal Cooper, who
Oh,
then
yeah,
I
yeah.
brought on the podcast. Then somehow I heard about Christina through Teal. She was probably on our podcast as well.
Funny.
And now that we're here with you. So it's always funny seeing these little intricate ways that it kind of like finds this person to this person to that person. And, just like you're saying, it takes a mind of its own. And, I even started making a list of where the location of all the people I've interviewed, because like if I end up in that city, it'd be great to see them. And
Totally.
it's so all over the map. It's like Austin, Arizona, San Diego. There's a beach in I forget, north of LA. I forget right now. Toronto. There's a
Yeah.
girl in South Africa I want to bring on. So
Nice.
it's so crazy to me, like how exactly what you're saying. It's like we now live in that age where you're able to just create your own community out of all over the world, which is a crazy way to
Well,
look at it.
don't you ski? I feel like I saw that on your Instagram. You should plan like a ski trip for all the people that have been in your
Uh,
podcast. Let's do a ski trip
that'd be
together with
sick.
everybody. Would be fun, right?
I tried planning like a meditation retreat with everyone, but then it didn't like really work out. Like I didn't get really many replies on it and like the time frame, but I'm 100% down on cultivating some sort of way. Cause I've thought about this. So I'm glad you're on board with this. Some sort of way
Yeah.
to have a guest, retreat or something, or, some sort of
Yes.
way to get everyone connected, because I feel like if I resonate with one of you guys, then you guys are going to resonate with everyone else as well. And maybe it's like a Venn diagram, but like for the most part, I feel like it would be pretty dope.
I vote ski trip, but
Ski
that's
trip.
just me. Ski trip or like lake house kind of vibes, because then it's like something for everybody. Maybe some people aren't into meditation, so it didn't resonate. And they were like,
That's a good point.
I'm not going to go on a whole retreat but you got to do something where there's a lot of options to be like, okay, it's like going to a bachelorette party. It's like everyone's not going to want to eat dinner at 5. So what are the other options that we
Mm.
can have going on for people?
The other thing I was thinking is maybe it's not, I haven't interviewed enough people. And this was, again, this was back whenever I think I had like 30, 40 interviews. So it wasn't as many people, but yeah, I'll definitely be coming to you whenever I start trying to plan that out, or figuring out how we can
Yeah.
make that a workout.
Yes. Funtivities committee. Let's
A
make it
fun
happen.
activities community. Yeah, I think it'd
Yeah.
be super dope. I think it would be super dope idea.
Yeah.
Ah, Brianna, dude. Oh, wait, I want to get back to your thesis. Is it called thesis for your doctorate?
My dissertation.
Dissertation. Yeah, what was that on again? Anxiety?
The full title was Anxiety as a Symptom of Imbalances in the Body, the Role of Neuroinflammation, the HPA Axis, and Stress.
Nice and long.
So nice and long, because I think that all of those parts are really important. Like, people don't realize that there's different kinds of anxiety
Mm,
in different parts of the brain. People don't realize that anxiety is on a spectrum, and that, you can be oscillating on that spectrum at any given time. Neuroinflammation, like is I think a really up and coming emerging field, particularly for mood disorders. And then stress gets a really bad rap. So I wanted people to realize that the goal is to modulate stress. Same thing with inflammation. We don't ever want to get rid of these things in our body. We want to modulate them, not eliminate them. So it was kind of talking about the role of all of those and how that kind of plays into the stress inflammation bucket and how that kind of works on where you could potentially fall on that anxiety spectrum.
So then was that kind of the crux of what you found, was just how do you regulate these things?
Yeah. So, I mean, I talked a lot about kind of what are the contributing factors, the triggers, understanding again what kind of anxiety you have, whether that's, prefrontal cortex based anxiety or amygdala based anxiety. Those are kind of two of the big subdividers. Um, how there are different nutraceuticals and plant medicine, so like herbs, I'm an herbalist myself, so different herbs that can play a role in that. Lifestyle things, also this idea of befriending anxiety and understanding that sometimes it's like a misuse of our imagination, so learning how to worry well and cultivate emotional well-being and emotional resilience, not necessarily avoiding or evading any of these things in our life. So really taking a holistic approach to understanding why it's even happening in the first place and what that means and how it physiologically is manifesting in the body and impacting different systems. So really again about that goal of modulating and mitigating, not necessarily eliminating any of those things in our body. Because even anxiety, like you wouldn't want to totally get rid of that from an evolutionary standpoint. It was a really important emotion to have. Like you were in a tribe and you looked over and your brother was like freaking out a little bit and he gave you, a look, you would want to be like, what's going on? Do we have to get out of here? Right. So like all of these things have served a purpose for us at some point. And I think along the way, it's just gotten oversimplified or into a bucket, or here's the problem, so here's the pill. And it's always anything in health, it's rarely ever just one protocol, one pill, one supplement, one herb. Like there's so much more that's going on. So then I basically took that whole dissertation and turned that into my befriending anxiety e-course, which goes into all of that, like all the different modules about neuroinflammation and stress and what anxiety actually is, and vitamins that can play a role in it, nutrient imbalances, botanicals, all of that. So it was kind of like my life work that I gave birth to, because anxiety was one of those emotions that I kind of struggled with. It was a joke in my family, like Sunday night Brianna, I would get super anxious for the week about everything I had to do and what sports I had and how I was going to balance that with dance and homework and whatever, and like working myself up into this, kind of thing. And so being a recovering super spaz was sort of my tagline. Like I made very cheeky and fun on social media over the years. And it's like anything like exposure therapy. Like once you really understand it and like I learned all the things about it, you're like, oh no, this is like such a mellow emotion and like actually like really means well. So it was like my life work. I loved it.
That's so funny. And I feel like it really leads credence to how we never know why we experience certain things. And then it kind of like all bubbled up to becoming the dissertation for your doctorate degree, 20
Totally.
some
I
years.
mean, it in my acknowledgement section, I actually like thanked basically the emotions that I had my whole life that kind of led me to this point to do my dissertation on this. Cause I mean, a lot of the times by the time you reach, a PhD level, it's like, yeah, you've been in a field for a while and you could go anyway. So it's like, what do I feel passionately about and almost delusionally crazy enough about to spend hours upon hours, not only researching, but then writing and then defending and like dedicating a lot of your life work to being like, no, this is like really cool stuff that people need to know. And I think it's an emotion, like I said, that people, are so quick to just be like, your anxiety's lying to you. And I'm like, well, no, it's not. Like there's a lot going on. Like a lot of our emotions are super complex, deep things going on. So it was one that I just felt, especially after the past few years, I think, we're seeing an increase of mood disorders like anxiety and depression and things like that. So it's something I just personally wanted to destigmatize as well.
Mm, that's really cool. I think it's also really cool that you kind of turned it into a course that you're like, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
just learned about all this. Now let me teach you and help you guys heal is on the way.
Yeah, I was like, I did all of the work and dedicated my whole adult life to this. So now you guys learn and have
And we'll
fun.
just spread it
So
around.
just spread it around. Yeah. So I was really, really proud of that because that was, like I said, just really cool. And I think, and I think a lot of the times in my practice as well, I was just, you kind of, advice is a form of nostalgia, I always say. So a lot of the times when I was getting clients, it was many times younger versions of myself, super type A, overachieving, go, 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 like go getters, burning the candle at both ends. And like how I had that conversation with myself at around 28, being like, dude, you can't keep doing this your whole life. You're going to burn out. And you're just like, where are you going with this? So I even learned a lot through that, and I was able to help. I feel like so many of the clients that I worked with too, because I had done so much of the research. So it was kind of just an extension of advice to my younger self, and things that I want people to feel comfortable like navigating and befriending a little bit more.
I find that so fascinating because that's something I've heard someone else talk about. I forget who, but even myself with the idea of like coaching is almost just coaching like a previous version of yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
I've seen that because I do like channeling work. And so when people sign up and like, I work with them and like I'll, connect to the spirit guides and whatnot and then tell them basically the answers to their questions. It's so wild to me how sometimes like the guides will like just won't talk. And I'll be like, guys, like what the fuck's going on? Like they're waiting for an answer. And they'll just be like,
Mhm.
the answer to this question. And then I like
Yeah.
kind of have to tap in. I'm like, oh yeah, I was just dealing with this last week. But how
Yeah.
frequently that occurs is like very
Oh my
fascinating
God.
to me.
I do some mentoring for like some younger women, and like when they're starting to try to get their business off of the ground, or even figuring out something as simple as like what should my Instagram handle be, right? Like, and we talk about like this idea of, okay, who do you wish like you would have had when you were at this stage of your life, right? Like that's usually your ideal client. It's either advice you
Mm,
wanted to hear when you were younger, that person that you were frantically Googling trying to find holistic practitioners for anxiety, right? Like, so it's becoming that, because through that, that is how you also learn. And that's why now I'm also so picky about who I actually work with, because to me, it's a relationship too. So, like, I'm also learning things, and I'm also having this energetic exchange. And so, like, for me, it's really important that I'm going to be learning things too that I feel like is going to help with the evolution of me as a person professionally. And so I think that that's important for people to figure out, even if they're in just like their business part of their journey. Like, who do I wish I would have had? And that's why I also, even with advice, like these prompts that I love too, because advice is not always just like what you need right now. It's also sometimes for what your future self is going to need. You haven't gone through it yet, but you might, right? Like, or you maybe had a friend who went through something similar and you're not there yet in your life, but you're like, there's some themes there that I could probably sit with. So it's advice to your younger self, advice to the chapter that you're in, and things you're going to need to hear at some point in your life. So I like love anything that could be reflective in that kind of nature.
and speaking of it sounds like you have, but have you, I'm guessing you've gotten to that point in your life where like something, I don't want to call it significant, but it could be like very minor, but it feels very significant, but you have no idea like what the meaning is. And you just know that it's something that's going to like reveal itself down the road.
I mean, that's how I feel currently. Like for me, like I was saying, like relationships, romantic relationships for me have always been my biggest teachers. And I know that there were so many energetic knots I had to untangle and learn. And that all went back to what we were just talking about before,
Mm.
self worth and all of that. And I feel like I've done, you probably know how it feels. Like you feel like you're like, I've done all my assignments. I'm like, I'm good to go. And you're like, okay, so now I'm ready for my prize. Like I'm ready for my grade. And the universe is like, well, not yet. And so I feel like right now for me, I'm just like very much so in this space of like fully trusting, which is full surrender, of being like,
Mm.
yeah, everything is happening for me and comes to me in the perfect time, space, and sequence. And like, I fully trust. And like, that is the first, I have said that in the past and not believed it, like fake affirmations, where people do that all the time and you write down a sticky note and you're like, yeah, I am. And I didn't believe it. And so, like, that, again, discernment of knowing versus believing, like, it's a full on knowing that, like, I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I need to be doing. And like, everything, I'm an energetic match for things in my life. And it's, like everything's always working out for me. So I think like right now that just so happens to be the phase of my life that I'm in. And for anybody struggling with the idea of surrendering and letting go, it's like the best feeling ever, because you're just like, yeah, man, like I placed my order and now I'm just hanging out with my friends and we're like enjoying appetizers and like having, like good conversations. And like that's what I feel like. I feel like I've placed my order and I'm just like at the table, which is like the best part now of like hanging out and being like, yeah, let's see what's going to come out.
It's such an amazing reflection because all I could think of was like, yeah, me too. I was just like, yep, same here. Like,
Yeah, I don't know, for me, that's just I know some people learn things in other ways, but I often joke about being like, I'm a slow learner and a hard learner, so but once I get the lesson, well, it's over, then I'm like, "Okay, we're good here, and I've integrated it, and now we can fully move on," but I've always been a slow learner. Even in school and, like, everything like that, like, I will have to really get in there and, like, wanna know all the nooks and crannies, but once I get it, I'm like, "We're good to go."
that was a huge element of me and trusting and like the energy of trusting because I was, back to like how I work with my dreams. I like set up this
Mhm.
question and it had this whole cascade of answers. And it got down to one piece. It was like you basically still have like a trust piece missing. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like I do trust. And then as I said that, it was like I got like this flash of like whenever like my spirit guides or my soul, whatever you want to call it, tells me something, I'll sit there and be like, "Are you sure? Like, are you
Uh-huh.
sure that's it?" They would repeat it. I'm like, "Are you sure?" And then they're like, "No, fine, fuck you. Like, we'll give you a different answer then." And I'm like, "Oh shit!" And then I just saw this cascade of events whenever I would be questioning like this, eternal knowledge that I'm receiving, and I'm just like, all right, guys, I get what you're saying. I'll just listen from now on. I won't ask you three times to repeat yourself, and yeah, I'll try this trust thing. It feels fucking
Yeah.
weird, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
I think it's hard when you're somebody like you sound like obviously like you've talked about like excelling in school and academia and all that. Like when you have a very strong analytical kind of foundation or it's a pillar, like there is a lot of this struggle sometimes of is it my intuition? If you're smart, you can logic your way in or out of anything. And so there is this kind of battle. And it's funny because I actually just had some Reiki healing done.
Mm.
And that was the thing that was blocked for me. She was like, your intuition is like on and off, on and off. And she's like, you have a hard time trusting yourself. And I'm like, I know. And I remember my mom being like, she's like, do you ever just like get tired of like being yourself sometimes? And I'm like, yeah, some days it's exhausting, like, always analyzing. And so it was just weird because I mean, you know how it goes, like after Reiki and like that was cleared for me. And now I'm just fully like, dude, I fully trust I'm like, no, I am really intuitive about things. So sometimes it's again, they gave me the permission and the space to just hold that for me of like what I knew, but I was still struggling even with that. So I think
Mm.
it's important to feel seen and heard and feel supported because it is so much. Sometimes it's just that person who is that catalyst for you that then you have like a full send into whatever, chapter that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah, my solar plexus was my big I think that's the trust, the intuition
Yeah,
with
I
my
did a lot of work on my solar
yeah, I'm
plexus.
still doing work on it. Kind of pissed me off because I have a story. So whenever I first got into plant medicine, the very
Mhm.
first, session I did was with psilocybin, and it was a lot of intuition work with like, the solar plexus chakra and all this different stuff. And then whenever I did ayahuasca, there was like this visual I got that a snake kind of like went into my body and was like collecting all the quote unquote debris, and it went through my entire body and was like about to leave my body, and I was like, wait, like you completely missed basically my solar plexus region where it hurts the most. And so the
Yeah.
snake came back down, looked at it, and then turned around and was like, nah, this is for you. And then just disappeared.
Whoa, that's wild. That's
Just
sick.
disappeared. And then I'm like sitting there. I started fighting it for a bit. I'm like, no, like you fucking just care of this. Take care of this. And then I sat there for a bit and I was like, all right. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to trust that this is like the best for me. And as soon as I had that thought, I like kind of turned and basically purged. And like that was like the repetitive thing that I kept getting throughout that ceremony was
Yeah.
anytime I started thinking that I should be tripping or that I'm not where I should be, then, and I just let go, that was whenever I kind of had these huge like, wow, and I guess I'm still integrating this because I'm getting like reminded of a lot more these huge like energetic releases of yes, just trust, just fall in. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, but if I don't hold on, then like what? Nothing's going to be able to grab me. And so it's a crazy feeling, and I'm even feeling like a lot of energy even still kind of coming up around this as we're talking about it.
That's amazing. No, I think that's why I'm actually I haven't done any plant medicines yet. And I'm so drawn to it because I just feel like it wasn't the right time. And I feel like I'm really in a place now where I'm so open to it and I really want to do it. And part of the reason I actually want to do it as well is because I do feel like I struggle with being so analytical all the time and so in my own head. And I feel like something like that, you literally have to be like, okay, I can't control this. Cause I've even been the kind of person my whole life, if something's supposed to make you really tired, it has the opposite effect on me. Like I've always been like that. So I had like low key, I'm like, oh, it's because I'm so like mentally whatever, always like in the thick of it. So I'm like, I really want to do things like that because I feel like, yeah, to your point, you have to just be like, no, we gotta surrender and like trust, baby, and like let this go, and like you can't get in there. And I would be interested to see how my body would respond to that and my mind at the same time.
Yeah, because you really got to just sit back and realize that you're not in control almost.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
think it'd be interesting.
yeah. I think the very first time I realized it was whenever I had taken the ayahuasca. I wasn't like it was like an hour and a half into it, and I like was kind of just sitting there like nothing happened, and I'm like, and I had to like kind of coach myself up, like, okay, if nothing's supposed to happen, that's like what's best. That's what's supposed to happen. And then it wasn't until that pivot where it was like, okay, just trust that this is for the best, that it like actually like purge, and then went into this whole mystical rabbit hole of stuff. And it's a crazy experience. I mean, even if it's just psilocybin, I feel like it's on that
Yeah.
same branch.
I want to start there. That would be my starter plant medicine, and then I would work my way up.
So
So we'll have to talk about that offline.
oh, okay, yeah, if you're not comfortable talking about it online,
Oh
but
no, I am. I didn't know. Like I didn't
oh
know if you were. So
oh yeah, yeah, I've gone down the rabbit hole pretty far with all this stuff. It's all out there. Yeah, but it's honestly interesting because I kind of go back and forth in whether or not ayahuasca or psilocybin is more like strong or more like which you should do. Like it seems like in the realm of things, like people have like a little bit more of a apprehension to ayahuasca, but even through my like experiences, I still am kind of like, I don't know, I feel like they're the same but different. Like I could really see it going either way. I think it's probably one of those things where it's like just whatever feels right to you, kind of go for it. But I could definitely see
yeah.
people going with ayahuasca before psilocybin.
No, I think I would start with psilocybin first. It just seems like more of a mellow, not mellow in the sense of what it does to you, but like, I've heard the stories of people getting like diarrhea and vomiting. Like that is just not the journey for me
Mm.
right now. So maybe eventually. And I also don't want to, I don't know if you have to do that for psilocybin, but like I know you have to give up like caffeine and a bunch of other stuff before ayahuasca. And I'm not interested in doing that right now.
Yeah, apparently ayahuasca, people say Western culture says that you should give it up for like 2-3 weeks before and after.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because like when you talk to people in Peru or in the Amazonian region, they kind of say that you really only need to do it like 4 or 5 days beforehand. That
Yeah.
Western society has amplified it. And so,
It's on
yeah,
brand
it said the same. Yeah, I
naturally.
said the same thing. I was like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna still do it anyhow." Like, yeah. So no, and then yeah, psilocybin. I think, yeah, like caffeine the day before. Empty stomach. Usually, you don't want to like have like crazy meals and stuff like that, or stuff
Yeah.
that's gonna mess with it. So yeah, it's definitely different in those
I
regards.
feel like it's also though you have to have conversations like this because you can't just a random person in an alley, like for me at least, like I feel like I would want it recommended. I always joke about there's certain things you don't get off a Groupon, like you don't get LASIK eye surgery, you don't get a deal for LASIK eye
Mm.
surgery. Like you do the real thing, you pay the full price, right? Like things like plant medicine, I would want the full like knowing it was vetted, knowing somebody had done it before or was somebody who was well recommended because it's a very transformative process, I would imagine. And so you want that to be somebody who's, credible and legitimate on some spiritual level.
Well, it's interesting too, because I didn't find this out, I think, until afterwards, is that traditionally speaking, the only person who would take the psilocybin was the shaman. And then they would,
Oh, interesting.
what do they call it? I think they're called the Aikidos or Kios. It's like this chanting, almost like this song that they sing during it. And so traditionally, only the shaman would take it, and then he would sing these. I wish I remember the name. It's like a Kios or Kitos, songs, and then everyone else would kind of just like lay there and just get all the information by themselves. And then when it came back to getting westernized, it was actually, now everybody in the thing, the shaman, the participants, everybody takes it. So
Interesting.
there is also that option available if you want to go the full traditional route, but there's that also then going to be that piece of you that's like, well, if I'm going all the way down to Peru and finding a
Yeah.
shaman, then I actually want to take it myself. And it's like, well, I mean, fair, but
Yeah.
it's funny.
Yeah. If I'm going in Peru and hanging out with a shaman, I'm taking it
Yeah.
myself.
I'm going to ingest that shit.
I'm an experiential learner, and that is how I want to learn. I want full send into that.
Yeah. No breaks.
Yeah.
Oh, damn. Well, I mean, this feels pretty complete to me. Brianna,
Yeah.
how you feeling?
I feel great. It was a great conversation. I loved it. It was super enlightening. It felt energetically mutual. I love that. It's very rare. So, right on. Thank you. I'm appreciative for having me on and grateful
Oh,
for
yeah.
your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time. If you're interested, the longest podcast I have to date is my ayahuasca experience. I actually talk about the first 15 minutes is like what I experienced in the first ceremony. And then the next hour and a half is like me talking with the shamans and like breaking it
Oh,
down.
nice.
And then the next 15 minutes is like the second ceremony and then breaking it down again. And honestly, it's a podcast I need to re-listen to, but I'll throw that out there for you if you're
Yeah.
interested.
Let me know. Let me know the number and I will definitely
I
listen to
believe
it.
45. It's either 45 or 44. I think
All right, I'll look
45.
into it.
And
Cool.
then the way I always end this is that I'm going to drop all your show notes or all your links in the show notes below. So I want to give you some space to talk to the audience, encourage them, plug some of your stuff, reference the links, but whatever's feeling called to you, just, I guess, speak from your heart and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mostly live on Instagram. So my handle is just at Brianna Diorio, and my website is briannadiorio.com. I have my own podcast called the Brianna Approved Podcast. So you can kind of find everything on my Instagram or website. So that's all there. And then if you're interested in learning more about anxiety, you can also check out my Befriending Anxiety course. And that's kind of all things Brianna Diorio.
I love it. It makes me Brianna approved. That makes it sound like you like rate stuff and you're like, oh, do I approve or disapprove of this chemical, or is that kind of the setup of it?
Yeah, it the genesis of it was, like, in my private practice many years ago, like, I would have clients texting me things, or we'd go to the store or whatever, and I'd be like, "This is not Brianna approved," or people would be like, "Is this Brianna approved?" They would text it to me, and that just kind of became my thing, and then my brother and I actually were just, like, messing around when we were gonna test out making a podcast, and you have to put a name in, and I was like, "I don't know, just put Brianna approved for now," and then, like, it was so on brand for me anyway, so it kinda just stuck, so yeah.
Hell yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, Brianna Diorio, thank you so much for being here. Audience Conscious Nonkeys, thank you for being here as well. Hope you guys got some amazing intel out of this, and hopefully you're able to live a more aligned, healthy life from the information we discussed today. Hopefully we're all going to surrender into the energy of the present moment. And appreciate you guys. Love you guys. And I will see you guys in the sixth dimension.